Chapter 24. Huh! Nye Tian could not help but be surprised to see the fat cat petrified. He had seen fat cat's surprised expression before, but it was rare to see such an expression. After more than 10 seconds, Nye Tian saw that fat cat still did not respond, so he could not help but frown and ask, "Fat, did you find anything?" Fat cat suddenly woke up, as if waking up from a dream, his eyes still flashing with a horrified look, but he waved his hand and said, "No, nothing." "Nothing?" Nye Tian murmured with a puzzled look, staring at Fat Cat for a long time, but the latter was still a little sluggish, and did not recover for a long time. He knew that Fat Cat must have found something, but was unwilling to say it. He was very curious about what shocking discovery Fat Cat had made, for it to have such a reaction. But looking at Fat Cat's expression, he would not say it. "Fat, are you okay?" Nye Tian could only helplessly ask, the corner of his mouth twitching. "No, I'm fine." Fat Cat waved his paw, forced a smile and said, "Actually, I didn't find anything, I was just thinking about some small things." Nye Tian's eyebrows furrowed. This attempt to cover up was too obvious. But he knew that Fat Cat would not say anything, so he could only shake his head to express his helplessness. At this time, Nye Tian had already realized that there were many things that he could not understand, so knowing some things in advance might not be a good thing for him. At the moment, the most important thing for him was to find a way to save his mother. "Fat, why didn't the seal in the celestial demon embryo work before?" At this time, Nye Tian suddenly thought of this and could not help but ask. Previously, he had also lost control several times, but the seal in his body did not work. This time, when he came to the Dark Sea Dark Prison, his divine sense was attacked, and the celestial and demon power was awakened, all because of the power of the seal in his body. This was obviously not a coincidence. The Fat Cat was much calmer now. She took a deep breath, looked at Nye Tian, and asked, "Nye Tian, how did you feel when the sealing power took effect?" Nye Tian's eyes narrowed. He thought for a moment and said, "When the power of the seal was awakened, I did have a strange feeling. However, the strangest thing is that I feel that the sealing power is not awakening on its own. It's as if it's being secretly controlled by someone." The Fat Cat twirled its long whiskers as a strange smile appeared on its face. It nodded and said, "Since you have this feeling, then my judgment is correct." "Judgment? What judgment?" Nye Tian was stunned for a moment and asked in astonishment. "Nye Tian, I've always felt that someone was secretly controlling the seal in your body." The Fat Cat's eyes flickered and said, "Now it seems that it is indeed the case." Hearing the Fat Cat's words, Nye Tian's eyes couldn't help but tremble, and he asked in astonishment, "Who is controlling the seal in my body?" There really was someone controlling the seal in his body. This was something that Nye Tian would never have imagined. This was too dangerous for him. QL11, if the person behind it wanted his life, wouldn't he be instantly killed by the power of the seal with just a thought? Thinking of this, Nye Tian couldn't help but take a deep breath, and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. "Nye Tian, don't worry. The person secretly controlling the seal will never hurt you." The Fat Cat's eyes swept over Nye Tian, and she could tell what he was thinking at a glance. Nye Tian's brows furrowed, and he couldn't react for a moment. He asked, "Why?" "Because the person secretly controlling the seal is the one who left it behind." The Fat Cat's eyes flickered and she said solemnly. Nye Tian's eyes flickered, and he immediately reacted and exclaimed, "My mother!" Fat Cat's meaning was clear. The person secretly controlling the seal was none other than Nye Tian's mother. This was because the seal in Nye Tian's body was left behind by his parents. His parents were the only two people in the world who could control the seal. It was impossible for these two people to harm him. The next moment, Nye Tian suddenly understood, and his eyes trembled slightly. He finally understood why the seal in his body would only awaken at this time. Because his mother was in the dark sea prison. If Chiwu Yunshio wanted to control the seal, she would need to meet certain conditions, and the most important condition was distance. It was impossible that she and Nye Tian were in a different world, and she could still control the seal. And now, the reason she could secretly control the seal in Nye Tian's body was because Nye Tian was close enough to her. After understanding this, Nye Tian couldn't help but exclaim, "My mother is not far from me." Now that he had understood everything, of course he was excited. Although he had not met his mother, she had already helped him out of danger twice. Seeing Nye Tian's excitement, the fat cat waved her hand and said, "Don't be so excited. Your mother might be thousands of miles away from you." Thousands of miles away? Nye Tian was stunned, and then he said, "That's impossible. If my mother is thousands of miles away from me, how can she control the seal in my body?" A strange light flashed in the fat cat's eyes, and she said, "Nye Tian, the seal on your godfiend nascent embryo is very strange. Unless there's a realm barrier, your parents can easily control the seal." Well, Nye Tian was struck dumb for a second and was astonished. He didn't expect the power of the seal in his body to be so strong. In other words, even if he was thousands of miles away from his parents would still be able to sense his existence, unless he was in a different realm from his parent. In fact, the fat cat didn't tell Nye Tian that the power of the seal in his body was far more than that. The fat cat knew that the seal in Nye Tian's body was very likely not created by his parent. His parents only obtained a powerful seal, and then left it on Nye Tian's godfiend nascent embryo. The fat cat even thought that Nye Tian's parents didn't know what the seal in Nye Tian's body was. The seal in Nye Tian's body shouldn't exist in this world. The fat cat was very sure that the 9 Extremes Chaos Beast had become Nye Tian's primordial spirit because of the seal in the godfiend nascent embryo. However, the fat cat wouldn't tell Nye Tian about this, because he knew that with Nye Tian's current knowledge, it wouldn't be good to tell him too much. "Fat cat, can I use the seal in my body to find my mother?" At this moment, Nye Tian's eyes suddenly trembled, and he asked excitedly. He didn't know where Chiwu Yunshio was imprisoned, but it would be great if he could use the power of the seal to find her. "You can't." The fat cat glanced at Nye Tian, but shook his head and said, "With your current strength, you can't control the seal in your body at all. That's why your parents can tell you of your existence, but you can't sense their existence. I'm guessing that after controlling the seal in secret twice, your mother's strength is also very depleted. If we want to find where she's imprisoned, we have to think of another way." "Mother." Nye Tian's eyes flickered slightly, and his eyes were clearly wet. He knew that Chiwu Yunshio must have suffered a lot when she was imprisoned in the dark sea black prison. Chapter 24-25. Nye Tian's eyes trembled slightly. It took a long time for him to calm down. Since the seal could not find Chiwu Yunshio, he had to think of another way. "Fat, can you tell how far mother is from us?" Nye Tian asked a moment later. He did not know anything about the dark sea black prison. It was too difficult to find a person here. The little fat cat shook its head helplessly and said, "Nye Tian, it is not an easy task to save your mother. Let's leave this place first and find someone else to help." Nye Tian thought for a moment, but there was nothing he could do. He could only leave. Then, he opened 9 Extreme and entered. He only relaxed after confirming that Jun Aoqing and Nye Qingwan were fine. Then, he asked Jun Aoqing to come out of the 9 Superbs, and briefly told her what had happened. Jun Aoqing frowned slightly. She did not think that Lai Yin Jiufeng and the others had already left. "Nye Tian, don't worry, we will definitely save Auntie," Jun Aoqing said softly when she saw Nye Tian's dark expression. Her eyes flashed with determination. Nye Tian nodded and did not say anything. Then, the two of them moved towards the surface of the sea. A moment later, Nye Tian and Jun Aoqing returned to the shallow layer of the sea. Nie Tian spread out his senses and found that there was no one on the surface of the sea. It seemed that the people of the cities had left. He did not think too much and came out of the dark sea. The surface of the sea was silent. There was not a single person in sight. The dark sea hunt had lasted for 10 days. It had not ended yet, but everyone had left. It was clear that the Dark Monarch had ordered everyone to leave. Nie Tian, where are we going next? Jun Ouching frowned slightly and asked softly. Return to the 7th main city first. Nie Tian thought for a moment and said solemnly. After thinking about it, he decided to go back to the 7th main city first. Maybe the spirit controller could help him. He did not understand the Dark Emperor at all. However, he knew that this person's strength was definitely above his. If he acted rashly now, not only would he not be able to save his mother, he might even lose his life. After a while, Nie Tian arrived at the 7th main city. After entering the city, Nie Tian asked Jun Ouching to return to the 9 superbs. It would be easier for him to act alone. Then, he went straight to the city governor's mansion. At this moment, the city lord's residence was heavily guarded. Several black-clothed cultivators stood guard at the entrance. The guards at the door have changed. Nie Tian looked at the guards from afar and frowned slightly. He felt a little strange. He remembered that the guards from before were not these black-clothed martial artists. It looks like the Dark Monarch already knows that you left the Dark Sea. Those black-clad cultivators are likely the Dark Monarch's people. The fat cat's voice rang out in Xiao Chen's spiritual sense. Nie Tian nodded slightly and immediately became cautious. It was obvious that the Dark Monarch was looking for him. It was likely that the 7th main city was already under the Dark Monarch's control. Nie Tian, leave. The fat cat frowned slightly and said in a deep voice. Nie Tian nodded and decided to leave. He was the hunter of the 7th main city. It was only natural that the Dark Monarch would want to take control of the 7th main city as soon as possible. Nie Tian felt that not only was the 7th main city under the Dark Monarch's control, but the spiritualist had also been captured by the Dark Monarch. Just as Nie Tian turned around, he sensed an extremely powerful aura closing in on him, causing his pupils to tighten involuntarily. However, the next moment, his expression relaxed as he murmured, "Lord Spiritualist." He could sense that the aura approaching him was none other than the spiritualist. Nie Tian, come with me. Nie Tian stood on the spot. A moment later, a voice was heard. Nie Tian could tell that it was the spiritualist's voice. His figure moved, following the aura. Moments later, Nie Tian walked out of the 7th main city and arrived at a remote coast. "City Lord, please come out," he said with a faint smile. "Nie Tian, I didn't expect you to dare to show up." The spiritualist's voice was heard as he appeared behind Nie Tian. "Master, what do you know?" Nie Tian turned around to look at the spiritualist and asked. The spiritualist smiled bitterly and said, "The Dark Sea hunt ended early. The Dark Monarch said that 7 kills escaped and killed all the hunters. And the person who saved 7 kills is you and your partner." "Humph." Nie Tian laughed and stared at the spiritualist. He said, "Master, do you believe that?" The spiritualist stared at Nie Tian as if he wanted to see something in his eyes. Unfortunately, Nie Tian was very calm. His eyes were clear and nothing could be seen. "Of course, I doesn't believe it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be meeting you here alone." The spiritualist smiled and said, "But you've put I in trouble. The Dark Monarch said that I was your accomplice. Not only did he take over the 7th main city, but he also took away I's position as the city master. If I hadn't run fast enough, I'm afraid he would have been a corpse." As expected, Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and his face was filled with worry. The situation was as he had expected. The 7th main city was indeed controlled by the Dark Monarch. Fortunately, the spiritualist had escaped. Nie Tian had come to the 7th main city to see the spiritualist. Therefore, it didn't matter to him whether the seventh main city was controlled or not. Then, the spirit controller frowned and asked in a grim voice, "Nye Tian, my young friend, what happened during the hunt in the Dark Sea?" Nye Tian didn't hide anything and simply told him what happened in the Dark Sea. The spiritualist was stunned when he heard it. He didn't expect Nye Tian to experience so many life and death situations in just a few days. So, the hunters were all killed by the scaled demon warriors. After a while, the spiritualist calmed down and said, 7 kills was released by the Dark Monarch himself. I didn't expect the Dark Monarch to be so cruel. He killed all the hunters for Li Juhan. I don't know how the other city lords would react if they knew about this. Nye Tian smiled bitterly and said, not all the hunters died. At least Yang Qi and the others left. The spirit controller shook his head with a smile and said, Yang Qi is lucky to be able to leave the Dark Sea prison. Nye Tian, my friend, you didn't leave because you wanted to save your mother, right? The spiritualist looked at Nye Tian and asked. Yes. Nye Tian nodded and frowned. I don't know where my mother is imprisoned. I would like to ask the city lord if there is an important place to imprison people in the Dark Sea prison? Nye Tian, my friend. The spiritualist looked at Nye Tian with a strange light in his eyes and said, I have a guess. Your mother is most likely imprisoned in that place by the Dark Monarch. Where? Nye Tian's eyes lit up as he asked in surprise. A place that interests you. The spiritualist smiled. A map appeared in his hand and his eyes fell on a place. Chapter 24-26. Nye Tian looked at the map in the spiritualist's hand and his eyes trembled. The place that the spiritualist was looking at was the unclaimed land on the map. It was the number 1 forbidden area of the Dark Ocean, the heart of the Dark Ocean. After a while, Nye Tian became cold and asked the spiritualist, City Lord, are you saying that my mother will be imprisoned in the heart of the Dark Ocean? The spiritualist nodded, then shook his head and said, I am not sure. I just feel that your mother is such an important prisoner that the Dark Emperor will definitely not imprison her somewhere else. It is very likely that she will be imprisoned in the heart of the Dark Ocean. Nye Tian's eyes trembled slightly and there was a complicated look in his eyes. Previously, he had guessed that Qi Sha was imprisoned in the heart of the Dark Ocean. However, Qi Sha's sudden appearance seemed to indicate that he was not imprisoned in the heart of the Dark Ocean. The spiritualist had said that the heart of the Dark Ocean was used to imprison the most important and dangerous enemy. If there was anyone more important than Qi Sha, Nye Tian could only think of one person, and that was his mother, Qi Wu Yunxiu. Until now, Nye Tian still did not know what kind of person the Dark Emperor was. However, he knew that the Dark Emperor really wanted his godfiend embryo. Since that was the case, the Dark Emperor must also want the extreme demon embryo. Nye Tian was even worried that Qi Wu Yunxiu's extreme demon embryo had already been taken away by the Dark Emperor. After all, Qi Sha's eyes were taken away by the Dark Emperor. The heart of the Dark Ocean, my mother must be imprisoned in the heart of the Dark Ocean. The more Nye Tian thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. My young friend Nye Tian, calm down. Seeing Nye Tian's strange expression, the spiritualist frowned and said, even if we know that your mother is imprisoned in the heart of the Dark Ocean, we cannot act rashly. The Dark Emperor is the supreme existence in the entire Dark Ocean. Not many people in the entire Dark Ocean have seen his true strength. Rumor has it that about 200,000 years ago, there was a riot in the Dark Ocean. More than 10 city lords wanted to overthrow the Dark Emperor. They joined forces to attack the Dark Emperor Palace and were about to succeed. But in the end, they were killed by the Dark Emperor with one move. Although I do not know if this rumor is true, it is enough to prove that the Dark Emperor is powerful. At this point, the spirit controller glanced at Nye Tian and said, with all due respect, your strength is not worth mentioning in front of the Dark Emperor. Nye Tian calmed down after listening to the spirit controller. The spirit controller was right. He was too weak. Even if he encountered an ordinary city lord, he would most likely lose, let alone the Dark Emperor. The gap in their strength made Nie Tian calm down. Next, he wanted to save his mother, and it was definitely not going to be easy. City Lord, how much do you know about the Dark Emperor? After thinking for a moment, Nie Tian suddenly asked. The spiritualist could not help but be taken aback. He looked at Nie Tian strangely but still said, "The Dark Emperor is the ruler of the Dark Ocean, but very few people know his true appearance. It is said that the Dark Emperor has a strange habit. He rarely leaves the Dark Emperor Palace, unless something dangerous happens in the Dark Ocean, such as the 7 kills incident. Under normal circumstances, the Dark Emperor never leaves the Dark Emperor Palace." Nie Tian frowned. This habit of the Dark Emperor was a little strange. However, what Nie Tian was asking about was not this information. He wanted to know if the city lords of the Dark Ocean were absolutely loyal to the Dark Emperor. "City Lord, have you ever thought of becoming the Dark Emperor?" After thinking for a moment, Nie Tian did not beat around the bush and asked directly. Hearing Nie Tian's words, the spiritualist's eyes trembled. He then laughed bitterly and said, "Of course I have. To be honest, the city lords of the 17 main cities, and even the city lords of the vassal cities, all want to be the Dark Emperor. However, the current Dark Emperor has already ruled the Dark Ocean for hundreds of thousands of years. His strength is unfathomable, and his position as the #1 main city is as stable as a mountain. Therefore, even if the other city lords have the intention to disobey, they would not dare to show it." The corner of Nie Tian's mouth curled up into a smile, and he muttered, "So that's how it is. Nie Tian, what are you thinking about?" The spiritualist saw that Nie Tian's expression was strange, as if he was plotting something, and asked cautiously, "City Lord, I want to join forces with the other city lords to fight against the Dark Emperor." Nie Tian said solemnly. "This." The spiritualist furrowed his brows, and his expression was a little awkward. Nie Tian's suggestion was not impossible, but it was very difficult. The Dark Ocean had a total of 17 main cities, and 83 vassal cities. Among the 17 city lords, none of them were willing to submit to each other. Furthermore, there was a deep hatred between them. It was almost impossible to unite the 17 city lords. "City Lord, don't worry. I naturally have a way to unite the city lords." Nie Tian saw that the spiritualist was worried, and said confidently with a smile. The spiritualist frowned, not knowing where Nie Tian got his confidence from. "Since that's the case, I will accompany you." The spiritualist nodded heavily, and prepared to accompany Nie Tian to meet the city lords. He was now someone that the Dark Emperor wanted to kill, so he could only choose to stand with Nie Tian. If the Dark Emperor did not die, there would be no place for the spiritualist in the Dark Ocean. "QL 11-inch my friend Nie Tian, which city lord are you going to meet first?" The spiritualist's eyes flickered as he asked. "Other than the first city, is the second city the strongest?" Nie Tian's lips twitched and he asked thoughtfully. The spiritualist nodded and said, "The city lord of the second city is called Bai Xianbing. This person is very shrewd, and he is a powerful character. Are you going to meet him?" "Bai Xianbing, huh?" Nie Tian thought for a while, and he immediately thought of another person. He smiled faintly. "Who is Bai Fengming to Bai Xianbing?" "Bai Fengming is the third of the 9 demons, Bai Xuanbing's son." The spiritualist frowned, not knowing why Nie Tian suddenly mentioned Bai Fengming. It seems that Bai Xianbing has long wanted to rebel. Nie Tian smiled faintly, and there was a strange look in his eyes. "Why do you say that?" The spiritualist was a little confused, and he could not help but ask. "Bai Fengming has hidden his strength, and wanted to kill Li Juhun during the hunt at the Dark Sea." Nie Tian's eyes turned and he said faintly, "Since he wanted to kill Li Juhun, it proves that the second city wants to attack the first city." The spiritualist frowned, and he asked in surprise, "How do you know?" Nie Tian laughed and said, During the hunt at the Dark Sea, I fought with Bai Fengming, and he died by my hands. The spiritualist's eyes trembled. Previously, Nie Tian had told him about the hunt at the Dark Sea, but he had said it very simply, and there were some details that he did not mention. He did not expect that Nie Tian would kill Bai Fengming. Actually, Bai Fengming did die because of Nie Tian, but the person who killed him was not Nie Tian, but Jun Aoqing. Bai Fengming was killed by Jun Aoqing in a second. Chapter 24-27. Why not? Nie Tian looked at the spiritualist calmly and asked with a smile. Nie Tian, my friend, you can't joke about this. The spiritualist saw Nie Tian's serious face and quickly said, You killed Bai Fengming and you still want to go to the second main city. Isn't that? He hesitated as he looked at Nie Tian with a confused expression, but didn't say the words courting death out loud. Nie Tian killed the son of the second main city's city lord, and he still wanted to go to the second main city. Wasn't that courting death? Bai Fengming was the third of the 9 demons and Bai Xuanbing's most beloved son. If Bai Xianbing knew that Bai Fengming died in Nie Tian's hands, he would definitely kill Nie Tian. Rumor had it that Bai Xuanbing's strength was second only to the Dark Emperor and he was a 100% immortal state warrior. Even the spiritualist was no match for Bai Xianbing. City Lord, look at me. Do I look like I'm joking? Nie Tian said with a faint smile. He looked at the spirit controller with a confident expression, as if he had a card up his sleeve. The spiritualist was stunned and couldn't speak for a long time. City Lord, let's go. Nie Tian smiled and gestured for the spiritualist to lead the way. The spiritualist was stunned for a few seconds before he came back to his senses. He sighed and led the way. The two of them headed toward the second main city one after the other. The second main city was located in the extreme north of the Dark Ocean Prison. It was on an ice field. QL11. The Dark Ocean Prison wasn't big, but the environment was different from each other. It was hot in the south and cold in the north. Half a day later, the spiritualist and Nie Tian entered the second main city and came to the sky above the city lord's mansion. The city lord of the 7th main city, the spiritualist, requests to see Lord Bai Xianbing. The spiritualist stood in the air and said, City Lord Qi, the city lord would like to see you. After a while, a response came from the city lord mansion. The spiritualist nodded and said to Nie Tian, Little friend Nie Tian, let's go. Nie Tian nodded with a calm smile, as if nothing had happened. The spiritualist was a little nervous and said, Nie Tian, little friend, when you see Bai Xianbing later, try not to speak. Leave everything to I. Nie Tian chuckled, but didn't say a word, nor did he give an answer. The two of them landed on the ground. A guard led them to the main hall of the city lord's mansion. Welcome, City Lord Qi. Please forgive me for not going out to meet you. As soon as the two of them arrived outside the main hall, a burst of hearty laughter came from the hall. Then, a middle-aged man in white clothes appeared. Nie Tian locked his eyes on the man in white and covered him with his divine consciousness. This person had a handsome appearance, a face that seemed to have been carved by a blade, a tall figure, and an imposing appearance. He was slightly similar to Bai Fengming, but his gaze was deep like the ocean, and it seemed as if it concealed a secret that was impossible to see through. This man was the city lord of the second main city, Bai Xianbing. Nie Tian looked at Bai Xianbing. His first impression was that this man was a smiling tiger. City Governor Bai, I took the liberty to visit you. Please forgive me for the inconvenience. The spirit controller smiled apologetically and showed his respect. Nie Tian stood at the side and looked at Bai Xianbing. He did not say anything. Bai Xianbing glanced at Nie Tian. He seemed a little displeased but did not say anything. He did not appear at the Dark Sea hunt that day, so he did not see Nie Tian. City Lord 7, please come in. Bai Xianbing smiled faintly and gestured for the spiritualist to enter the main hall. The spiritualist and Nie Tian entered the main hall. The scene that greeted them stunned them. There were a few people sitting in the main hall. Nie Tian was familiar with some of them. He saw Yuan Ying, the city lord of the 4th main city, and Lin Yibiao, the city lord of the 8th main city. There were a few other people sitting beside Yuan Ying and Lin Yibiao. Their auras were no weaker than the two of them. It was obvious that these people were city lords of major cities. The spiritualist was stunned for a few seconds before he reacted. He coughed and smiled awkwardly. Cough, cough. I didn't expect it to be so crowded here. So many city lords are here. He did not expect there to be so many city lords in Bai Xuanbing's residence. It was as if these people were plotting something. It's you! Nie Tian. Yuan Ying and Lin Yibiao stood up at almost the same time. They looked at Nie Tian in shock and said in unison. However, Nie Tian's reaction was very calm. With a calm smile, he said, "Are you surprised to see me?" Yuan Ying and Lin Yibiao looked at Nie Tian with trembling eyes. They said at the same time, "You're not dead." All the hunters in the Dark Sea hunt had died tragically. Even Li Juhun, Bai Fengming, and the others had died. But Nie Tian had survived. In the eyes of Yuan Ying and the others, this was completely impossible. All the hunters were dead. Why was Nie Tian still alive? "City lords, do you wish for me to die?" Nie Tian smiled faintly. He did not panic at all. Lin Yibiao reacted and squeezed out a smile. He said, "That's not it." But Yuan Ying's attitude was not so good. He stared at Nie Tian coldly and asked, "Brat, why are you still alive?" His son, Yuan Lai, had died in the Dark Sea hunt. But Nie Tian was still alive. This made him feel inexplicably angry. Why can't I be alive? Nie Tian could not be bothered with Yuan Ying. He replied cold and stared at Bai Xianbing. He smiled faintly, but did not speak. "Are you the hunter who defeated Fengming?" Bai Xianbing looked at Nie Tian and asked in a deep voice. Nie Tian nodded slightly. He laughed and said, "City Lord Bai, it's so lively here. So many city lords are gathered here. Are you plotting something?" The spiritualist's eyes narrowed when he heard Nie Tian's words. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. He did not expect Nie Tian to speak so directly. Bai Xianbing was taken aback. A murderous glint flashed in his eyes. He sneered, "Brat, sometimes it's not a good thing to be too smart." The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched, and he said in a more direct manner, "So you're really plotting against the Dark Sovereign then?" His voice was not loud, but it was like a sudden clap of thunder, exploding in the hall. Everyone stood up in an instant and stared at Nie Tian with murderous eyes. The atmosphere fell into a suffocating silence. Nie Tian was right. Bai Xianbing and the others were gathered to plot to overthrow the Dark Emperor. The various city lords were originally quite dissatisfied with the Dark Emperor. In this Dark Sea hunt, the various cities had suffered heavy losses, and many city lords had lost their beloved sons and disciples. Bai Xianbing, Yuan Ying, Lin Yibiao, and the others all lost their sons. Their anger could no longer be suppressed, and they finally exploded. Hence, the gathering of the city lords was held. But they did not expect the spiritualist and Nie Tian to visit. Chapter 24-28. The main hall of the city magistrate's mansion was deathly silent. The tension was palpable, like an arrow knocked on a bowstring. The spiritualist looked at the city magistrates, his forehead beaded with sweat. He wanted to say something, but didn't know what to say. Nie Tian had turned the situation into a deadlock with just a few words. The spiritualist hadn't expected that. "Ha ha ha!" Nie Tian laughed. "Calm down, city magistrates," he said coolly, "relax." Bai Xianbing and the others looked at Nie Tian in confusion. They couldn't understand how a mid-stage paramount god could remain so calm in the face of so many powerful experts. After a few seconds, Bai Xianbing spoke in a deep voice. His delicate face was so deep that it was almost sinister. "Kid, what are you trying to do?" "I'm here to help you, City Magistrate Bai," Nie Tian said with a faint smile, not bothering to avoid Bai Xuanbing's gaze. Help us! Bai Xianbing said with a cold laugh, looking at Nie Tian with disdain. You think you can help us? Nie Tian was too weak, and yet he was saying he wanted to help Bai Xianbing and the others. In Bai Xuanbing's opinion, it sounded like a joke. QL11A mid-stage paramount god wouldn't make a difference whether he was there or not. Nie Tian knew what Bai Xianbing was thinking. Bai Xianbing looked down on him. In the next moment, Nie Tian's eyes flickered as he said, I killed Bai Fengming. Bai Xianbing heard the faint voice, but it was like a thunderclap. What did you just say, kid? Bai Xianbing was taken aback at first, but then his expression flickered. He let out an enraged howl, and his energy surged, shaking the entire hall. The spiritualist's eyes went wide, and he looked at Nie Tian in disbelief, wondering if he'd misheard. Nie Tian said that he killed Bai Fengming in front of Bai Xianbing. Wasn't that courting death? Even if you killed Bai Fengming, you don't have to say it out loud. Since no one else knew about it, Bai Xianbing thought that Bai Fengming was killed by someone else. The other city lords were also flabbergasted as they stared at Nie Tian with incredulity written all over their faces. On the day of the Dark Sea Hunt, many people saw Nie Tian defeat Bai Fengming. But at that time it was not a fair fight. After all, Bai Fengming was the third strongest of the 9 demons. If it was a true battle to the death, he might not lose to Nie Tian. What was even more surprising was why Nie Tian would say this. I said, I killed Bai Fengming. Nie Tian stared at Bai Xianbing and said word by word. Impossible. Bai Xuanbing's eyes widened. You can't kill Bai Fengming with your strength. I can't? Nie Tianling laughed and said, the Dark Raven Sword Seal. Bai Xuanbing's expression froze when he heard this. Then, the anger in his eyes erupted like a volcano. The Dark Raven Sword Seal was Bai Fengming's hidden strength. He would not use the Dark Raven Sword Seal unless it was a life and death situation. If Nie Tian knew about the Dark Raven Sword Seal, it meant that he really killed Bai Fengming. Son of AB***, you're courting death. In the next moment, Bai Xianbing let out a wild roar and unleashed all of his aura, which morphed into a torrential, ocean-like aura that rumbled towards Nie Tian. He wanted to use his aura to oppress Nie Tian to death. Boom! In the blink of an eye, Nie Tian felt his body being enveloped by an enormous force. His chest felt like it was being pressed down by a huge rock, making it hard for him to breathe. Crack, crack, crack. The pressure from his body was too great. The floor beneath Nie Tian's feet cracked inch by inch. Nie Tian. Upon seeing this, the spirit controller's expression suddenly changed, and she cried out in alarm. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of Nie Tian's mouth, but there was a strange smile on his face. Bai Xianbing was indeed powerful. He should be at the same level as Nangong Duxiu and Earth Chief. However, he was still weaker than Tian Chief and Nie Dao. City Lord Bai Fengming wanted to kill me. I was only defending myself. Nie Tian endured the pressure and said, even if he didn't die in my hands, he would definitely die in the hands of a scaled demon. Bai Fengming is already dead. Even if you kill him, you won't be able to resurrect him. I can help you fight against the Dark Emperor. Take it as compensation for killing Bai Fengming. How about it? At this moment, Nie Tian's condition was not that bad. With his current strength, it was impossible for Bai Xianbing to kill him with his aura. Moreover, he could feel that the seal power in his body was about to move. If the seal activated the demonic god power again, Bai Xianbing might not be his opponent. However, he did not completely release his strength because he wanted to cooperate with Bai Xianbing. Stinking brat, you'd better break through this city lord's aura pressure before you speak. Bai Xianbing let out an explosive roar as his aura skyrocketed once again, morphing into an even stronger pressure that bore down on Nie Tian. Alright. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. Cold, he roared and the power of the stars in his body exploded. Boom. A muffled sound echoed out as Bai Xuanbing's aura was broken. Rumble. Almost simultaneously, The main hall of the city magistrate's mansion trembled and collapsed. Bai Xianbing staggered backward several paces under the impact of Nie Tian's aura. He steadied his body, and his eyes were filled with shock as he exclaimed, "How is this possible?" He had never imagined that Nie Tian would be able to break through his aura. Given his current level of strength, even an ordinary peak paramount god would find it hard to stand up to him. Nie Tian was only a mid-paramount god, so how could he have broken through his aura so easily? How could Nie Tian's strength be so strange? City Magistrate Bai, Nie Tian said coolly, wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth, "You're underestimating someone who killed Bai Fengming. You should know how strong Bai Fengming is. The fact that I killed him proves that I'm stronger than him." The reason Nie Tian had brought up the matter of Bai Fengming was to prove his strength. More importantly, he wanted to shock Bai Xianbing so that he wouldn't underestimate him again. So what? Bai Xuanbing's eyes suddenly sank while he revealed killing intent, and he roared explosively. "You killed my son! I'll definitely kill you!" Bai Xianbing blurred into motion and punched out. Boom! His fist aura rumbled as it shot towards Nie Tian in the shape of a mountain. Like a sharp awl, it shot towards Nie Tian. Crack! 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 All of a sudden, the cold air surged out, and the surrounding space was directly frozen. In the void, countless ice blades appeared, like a storm, shrouding the profound ice fist shadows, roaring and roaring, icy cold and murderous. Watch out! The sudden turn of events caught the spirit controller off guard. He screamed, and his heart almost jumped out of his throat. The other city lords were also dumbfounded, their eyes trembling. Bai Xianbing was so strong that even a peak paramount god would be killed in the face of a single fist strike. Chapter 24-29. Die for me. Bai Xuanbing's eyes were filled with killing intent as he roared. It was as if he could already see the scene of Nie Tian being killed. In his opinion, Nie Tian would definitely not be able to block this punch. Everyone's heart tightened. They did not even dare to blink, afraid that they would miss out on this exciting scene. Boom! The mystic ice fist was like a raging dragon, exploding in the air as it headed towards Nie Tian. At this moment, Nie Tian felt the sealing force in his body being released once again. The 9,000 fiend god Qi was instantly awakened. It was obvious that his mother had helped him once again. Human sword slashes the stars. In the next moment, Nie Tian's sword intent surged out, merging with the fiend god Qi. In an instant, the fiend god's sword appeared, roaring like a black dragon. So strong! The city lords were shocked by this sudden scene, and they cried out in shock. How could they have imagined that Nie Tian would be able to unleash such terrifying power in an instant? Rumble! Immediately after, the mystic ice fist and the celestial demon sword shadow collided with each other, causing a loud explosion in the air. A shock wave that was visible to the naked eye blossomed and spread in all directions like a giant ripple. Yuan Ying and the other city lords could not help but be pushed back by the shockwave. The attack that Nie Tian had unleashed was too terrifying. It actually clashed head-on with Bai Xianbing. Boom, boom! But in the next moment, the fiend god sword shattered under the impact of the cold energy. Boundless sword intent exploded, wreaking havoc in the air. Bang! Following which, a muffled sound was heard. A figure was sent flying, leaving a trail of blood in the air. Everyone could clearly see that the figure was none other than Nie Tian. After Nie Tian awakened the 9,000 fiend god Qi, he was indeed very strong. But Bai Xuanbing's punch was even stronger. Even though Nie Tian had temporarily awakened the 9,000 fiend god Qi, he was not Bai Xuanbing's opponent without fully unleashing the fiend god Qi. Nie Tian's silhouette flew a few thousand meters away before he finally managed to stabilize his body by relying on his astral soul wings. However, at this moment, his entire body was drenched in blood. QL11 Bai Xuanbing's punch was a fatal blow. It was truly terrifying. Nie Tian faced it head-on and suffered heavy injuries. Not dead. Bai Xianbing raised her head abruptly while her piercingly cold and murderous gaze locked onto Nie Tian, and then her gaze trembled as she cried out in shock. How could this be possible? His all-out punch was enough to destroy heaven and earth. Even the other city lords present would find it difficult to withstand it. However, Nie Tian had actually withstood the attack head-on. Well, the others all looked at Nie Tian in shock. They didn't expect Nie Tian to survive. Bai Xuanbing's palm strike was indeed terrifying. It was unimaginable that Nie Tian was still alive. City Lord Bai, that's a really vicious punch. Nie Tian stood in the air and stared at Bai Xianbing with a scorching gaze. There wasn't any fear in his eyes. Instead, he spoke in a mocking tone. His current state only looked frightening. However, in reality, his injuries weren't that serious. At least, his life wasn't in danger. Little bastard, you're courting death. Bai Xianbing could hear the provocation in Nie Tian's words. He roared angrily and wanted to attack again. City Lord Bai, with your status, you didn't manage to kill Nie Tian with a single punch. Are you going to attack again? At this moment, a figure appeared and stopped Bai Xianbing. Spiritualist, get out of my way. Bai Xianbing stared at the person and said coldly. His tone was cold and spiritualist. City Lord Bai Nie Tian is indeed very strong. With him around, he'll be a great help to us. Then, another figure appeared to protect Nie Tian. It was the 8th City Lord, Lin Yibiao. There was a grudge between Lin Yibiao and Nie Tian. Before the hunt at the Dark Sea, Nie Tian injured his son, Lin Qiang. Because of that, Lin Qiang didn't participate in the hunt at the Dark Sea and managed to stay alive. Therefore, Lin Yibiao didn't hate Nie Tian. Instead, he was grateful. City Lord Bai, let's forget about your son. The other city lords tried to persuade him after witnessing how terrifying Nie Tian was. All of you, get out of my way. Bai Xuanbing's face was stern. He looked at everyone and said coldly, I must kill him today. I'll kill anyone who dares to stop me. Bai Xuanbing's cold roar showed his determination to kill Nie Tian. Since he had already made his move, there was no way he would allow Nie Tian to live. The spiritualist and the others felt Bai Xuanbing's murderous intent. They were stunned and instinctively took a step back. Die, son of AB****. At that moment, Bai Xianbing suddenly moved. He soared into the sky and released an extremely cold mystical ice chi. Crack, crack, crack. Terrifying dark ice spread out, and wherever Bai Xianbing passed, the space was directly frozen. Outside his body, the mystical ice chi formed a giant icicle that was close to 10,000 meters long. He turned into a moving iceberg and charged towards Nie Tian. Bai Xianbing released his mystical ice chi to the extreme. He was determined to kill Nie Tian this time. High up in the sky, Nie Tian sensed the piercing aura and couldn't help but frown. Bai Xuanbing's aura was even more terrifying than before. It was impossible for Nie Tian to block the attack with the strength of 9,000 demons. Nie Tian, gather the strength of 9,000 demons and attack your right eye. Suddenly, Fat Cat's voice rang in Nie Tian's divine sense. Nie Tian was stunned and couldn't react in time. Don't ask too much. Do it now. Fat Cat screamed anxiously. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He made up his mind and immediately activated the celestial demon embryo. The strength of 9,000 demons gathered like a raging dragon and rushed towards his right eye. He didn't know why Fat Cat wanted him to do this, nor did he know what the consequences would be. The power of 9,000 gods and demons was attacking his right eye. Was he trying to destroy his right eye? But at this moment, Nie Tian couldn't care less. He had to risk his life. He chose to believe in Fat Cat. Rumble! The power of 9,000 gods and devils within Nie Tian's body surged violently and rushed towards his right eye like waves of gods and devils. In the next moment, Nie Tian's right eye trembled and exploded. Half of his face became a bloody mess. Arg! The sudden pain spread throughout his body, and Nye Tian couldn't help but scream. The others were stunned. They looked at Nye Tian in a daze, not knowing what had happened. Boom! In the next moment, Nye Tian felt a rumbling sound in his eye sockets, and the power of 9,000 fiend gods formed a vortex of fiend gods. In the next moment, a bizarre scene occurred. The vortex spun madly, and in the blink of an eye, turned into Nye Tian's eyeball. As soon as the eyeball came to form, Nye Tian felt a surge of boundless power, which was about to be unleashed in the next moment. Chapter 24:30. Demonic Eye. Boom. The moment the little fat cat uttered those 3 words, a cold black light suddenly burst out of Nye Tian's right eye, like a sharp arrow shot out of a bow, murderous and murderous. In an instant, an extremely dark aura spread out and filled the space within a few thousand meters. The entire space seemed to have fallen into eternal darkness. Boom! Crack, crack, crack! In the next moment, the cold black light pierced through the giant icicle, and there was an explosion in the air. The huge ice all exploded inch by inch, crumbling bit by bit, turning into ice-cold air in the air, dispersing. The space within a 10,000-meter radius was affected by the mystical ice chi and was covered in a layer of frost. At this moment, Bai Xuanbing's eyes trembled, and her face was filled with extreme shock. He saw a ray of black light coming towards him. It was so fast that it almost tore the space apart. Before he could react, he heard the sound of flesh being torn apart. Then, a heart-wrenching pain spread through his entire body. That black beam actually pierced through his chest and pierced through the vital point of his heart. Bai Xuanbing's body trembled and he lost control. He fell from the sky like a kite with a broken string. The sudden scene made everyone's eyes widen. They had no idea what had happened. QL11 By the time they reacted, Bai Xuanbing had already landed heavily on the ground, creating a deep pit. His entire body had turned into a pile of meat paste. Everyone looked at the ground in unison, and they were shocked to the extreme. Their eyes and bodies were trembling, and they didn't know how to express the shock in their hearts. The city lord of the second main city, Bai Xuanbing, was second only to the Dark Emperor in the Dark Ocean prison. But he was killed by Nye Tian in such a strange way. This scene was simply too shocking. The city lords stood rooted to the ground like statues. They never would have thought that Bai Xuanbing would be killed by Nye Tian after killing him. At the same time, high up in the sky, Nye Tian's figure froze, and the god-fiend power around him dissipated. His aura returned to normal. At this moment, he was no different from before. However, there was a slight change in his right eye. There was an extreme dark power hidden in his pupil. Nye Tian stood rooted to the ground in a daze. After a long while, he came to his senses and asked in a trembling voice, What happened just now? He did kill Bai Xuanbing, but he didn't know how he did it. In fact, he couldn't even feel any changes in himself at this moment. He clearly remembered that his right eye had exploded under the impact of the power of 9,000 fiend gods. But now, his right eye was as good as new. There was only a faint power hidden in it, like a monster in deep sleep. Nye Tian, you just activated the demonic eye. After a long time, the fat cat's voice sounded, trembling a little. It was obvious that she was very nervous and excited. Demonic eye? Nye Tian was stunned. He had no idea what the fat cat was talking about. He only knew that his eye was the starry eye. When did it become the demonic eye? Nye Tian, I don't know what's going on either, Nye Tian said. The fat cat took a deep breath and calmed down. I only vaguely remember that people with the god-fiend nascent embryo have very powerful eye powers. Just now, I suddenly thought of the demonic eye. So I asked you to use the power of 9,000 fiend gods to activate the demonic eye. Nye Tian frowned as he recalled what happened just now. He couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. His heart palpitated. The fat cat wasn't sure about the demonic eye, so she asked him to forcefully attack his right eye. If the demonic eye hadn't been activated just now, Nye Tian would have been a corpse. But until now, he still didn't know what the demonic eye was. Was it an innate other pupil? Obviously, the fat cat didn't know much about the demonic eye. After all, he only had 7 tails and many chinchillas' inherited memories hadn't been awakened yet. Fat, how can the demonic eye be so powerful? Nye Tian was stunned for a moment. He looked at Bai Xuanbing's corpse on the ground and asked in astonishment. The demonic eye had just been activated and a ray of eye power killed a peak immortal state expert. Wasn't this a little too terrifying? The fat cat frowned. When the demonic eye was activated, it was attacked by the power of 9,000 fiend gods. That's why it released such a powerful demonic energy. Under normal circumstances, the power of the demonic eye is closely related to the power of the fiend gods that you awaken. The more power you awaken, the more powerful the demonic eye will be. Nye Tian nodded. So the demonic eye's eye power was stimulated by the power of the fiend gods. However, the power of the fiend gods in his body wasn't fully awakened. It was only under the stimulation of the seal in his body that he temporarily awakened the power of 9,000 fiend gods. Fat, why did the demonic eye only awaken the right eye? What about the left eye? Nye Tian asked as he thought of another question. The fat cat hesitated when he heard Nye Tian's question. He coughed and said, I don't know either. Nye Tian frowned and couldn't help but smile as he joked. Don't tell me your left eye is a different pupil? The awakening of the abnormal pupil usually happened in both eyes. It wasn't normal for Nye Tian to only awaken the right eye. The fat cat was stunned. There was a flash of surprise in his eyes, but he quickly regained his composure. He didn't expect Nye Tian's joke to be right. The eyes of the fiend god nascent embryo were indeed 2 different abnormal pupils. Nye Tian's right eye was the demonic eye, while his left eye was the other abnormal pupil. The fat cat vaguely remembered that in the later stages, the fiend god nascent embryo's left and right eyes could fuse together and become even more powerful abnormal pupils. The demonic eye doesn't seem to be among the 10 pre-heaven abnormal pupils. Nye Tian murmured, wondering which one was more powerful, the demonic eye or the 10 pre-heaven abnormal pupils. But for now, the demonic eye wasn't any weaker than the other abnormal pupils. After all, the devil eye had killed a peak paramount god in the blink of an eye. Nye Tian, don't worry about the demonic eye for now, the fat cat said with a smile. Let's deal with the current situation. Nye Tian smiled and nodded. He descended from the sky and landed in front of the spiritualist and the others. At this moment, the spirit controller and the other city lords were looking at Nye Tian with disbelief in their eyes. Their eyes were filled with shock and confusion, but more than anything else, they were filled with fear and dread. The fact that Nye Tian had killed Bai Xianbing in the blink of an eye had shocked the city lords to an unimaginable degree. Bai Xianbing had been the strongest among them, and yet she had been killed by Nye Tian. How could they not be afraid of Nye Tian? City lords, have you seen enough? Nye Tian's expression was indifferent, and he said coldly with a carefree expression. The city lords suddenly snapped out of their daze, and expressions of fear appeared on their faces. They feared that Nye Tian would get angry and kill them all. The truth was that Nye Tian wasn't strong enough to fight any of them. His demonic eye had been drained of its power, and was currently in a state of replenishment. He had no idea how long it would take for the demonic eye to recover. Chapter 24:31. Nye Tian looked at the group of city lords with a strange gaze, a strange smile on his face. The city lords all looked fearful and didn't even dare to look him in the eye. Fellow city lords, I'm not here to kill anyone. Then Nye Tian looked at everyone and smiled. I just want to join forces with everyone to fight against the Dark Emperor. I don't think you are like City Lord Bai Xianbing and think that I don't have the right to join forces with you, right? His calm words were like thunder in the ears of the city lords, causing their bodies to tremble slightly. Bai Xianbing looked down on Nye Tian, but in the end, he was killed by Nyetian. At this moment, how could these city lords possibly despise Nyetian? They felt that Nyetian was far stronger than them and could even fight against the Dark Emperor. Lord Nyetian, you must be joking. After a while, Yuan Ying was the first to speak. He smiled apologetically and said respectfully, "It is my honor to be able to join forces with Lord Nyetian. Fourth City Lord is indeed a smart man." Nyetian smiled faintly. His gaze swept from Yuan Ying to the other city lords, and he said, "Everyone, the 4 city lords have already expressed their stance. What about you?" "I, Lin Yibiao, am willing to follow Lord Nyetian to fight against the Dark Emperor." Lin Yibiao immediately reacted and said loudly, "I am willing to follow Lord Nyetian." The other city lords reacted and said quickly. A faint smile appeared at the corner of Nyetian's mouth. He was very satisfied with everyone's attitude. He originally only wanted to join forces with these city lords, but he didn't expect to become their leader. This was the power of an expert. If Nyetian hadn't killed Bai Xianbing, these city lords wouldn't have respected him. Since he got the approval of the city lords, the rest would be easier. Afterwards, Nyetian and the others arrived at a small courtyard, where they took their seat. "Lord Spiritualist, give me the map." Nyetian looked at the spiritualist and nodded. "Lord Nyetian." The spiritualist handed the map to Nyetian with a respectful expression. Even the way he addressed Nyetian had changed. Nyetian took the map and opened it. His gaze locked onto the heart of the Dark Sea. "Lord Nyetian, could it be that you wish to enter the heart of the Dark Sea?" Lin Yibiao asked in astonishment as he looked at Nyetian. "Yes." Nyetian nodded his head, and did not explain too much. Instead, he said, "I heard that the Dark Emperor rarely leaves the Dark Emperor Hall, then we will start from the heart of the Dark Sea." This. Yuan Ying's expression darkened. He hesitated and said, "Lord Nyetian, the heart of the Dark Sea is in the center of the Dark Sea and is surrounded by 17 main cities. It is hundreds of miles away from the first main city, where the Dark Emperor is. Why do we want to start from the heart of the Dark Sea?" Before Nyetian could speak, the spiritualist glared at Yuan Ying and said, "Lord." Before Nyetian could speak, Yuan Ying, since Lord Nyetian has made this decision, then he must have his reasons. Why do you ask so many questions? Yuan Ying's gaze froze, and he didn't dare to speak anymore. However, his expression darkened even more. Nyetian's gaze swept across everyone. He thought for a while and said, "To be honest, we are going to the heart of the Dark Sea to save someone." "Save people?" Yuan Ying and the others were taken aback, their faces filled with astonishment. They had thought that Nyetian wanted to enter the heart of the Dark Sea to occupy this place first, then think of a way to attack the first main city. They didn't expect that Nyetian was actually going to save someone. "Lord Nyetian, who exactly is imprisoned in the heart of the Dark Sea?" Lin Yibiao calmed down and asked nervously. The heart of the Dark Sea was the first forbidden area of the Dark Sea prison. Someone was actually imprisoned there. It must be a very terrifying person. A person who is very important to me. Nyetian's eyes were burning as he said in a deep voice. Obviously, he didn't want to say too much to these people. Lin Yibiao and the others were very smart and didn't ask any more. "Do any of you know about the heart of the Dark Sea?" Nyetian's gaze swept across everyone and asked with a frown. "Lord Nyetian, I am the 5th main city's city lord Qilan." At this time, the 5th city lord Qilan spoke and said, "The 5th main city is the closest to the heart of the Dark Sea. I have secretly explored the heart of the Dark Sea before." The other city lords heard Qilan's words and their expressions changed at the same time. The heart of the Dark Sea was a forbidden area and no one was allowed to approach it. Qilan actually secretly explored it. Qilan laughed dryly and ignored the others. He looked at Nyetian and said, "Lord Nyetian, I brought 30 martial artists to explore the heart of the Dark Sea. But when I came back, I was the only one left." As he spoke, Lan's expression was a little frightened. It was obvious that he recalled something terrifying. Fifth City Lord, what did you experience? Tian frowned and asked in a deep voice. Very terrifying. Lan's expression was solemn and his eyes couldn't hide the fear. He said, actually, we didn't enter the heart of the Dark Sea at that time. We just came to the outer sea of the heart of the Dark Sea. It was there that we encountered a terrifying killing array. All my subordinates died in the killing array. I risked my life to escape from the killing array. There is still a terrible wound on my chest. As Lan spoke, he tore off his shirt and revealed his majestic upper body. On his chest, there was a clear black handprint. It looked like a ghost claw and was full of hostility. Tian sensed the aura of the black handprint and his eyes couldn't help but change. This aura was very similar to the aura of Li Qi. The dark aura was strong and at the same time, there was also a majestic wood attribute aura. It seems that the killing array is not trivial. The spiritualist said and looked at Lan. It can actually hurt the Fifth City Lord. The Fifth City Lord, Lan, was the youngest among all the main city lords. He was only a few 100,000 years old. However, Lan's strength was very strong. He was said to be second only to the Dark Emperor and Bai Xianbing. The killing array could injure Lan like this. It showed how terrifying it was. Fifth City Lord, this black handprint has a strong suppression on your strength, right? Tian looked at Lan and said in a deep voice. Lan smiled bitterly and nodded helplessly. This black handprint was very strange. Lan tried all kinds of methods but couldn't get rid of it. Although the handprint didn't make him feel pain, it had a strong suppression on his strength. Don't move. Let me try. Tian's face darkened slightly. Then, a black flame gushed out of his palm and directly shrouded the black handprint on Lan's body. Lan instantly felt a sharp pain. It was as if his body was about to be torn apart. It made his face contorted in pain. However, the next moment, he felt that the suppression of the black handprint was a lot weaker. After a while, the black flame disappeared. The handprint on Lan's chest didn't disappear, but it was a lot lighter. Thank you, Lord Tian. Lan was stunned for a few seconds before he reacted and bowed to thank him. It's nothing. Tian smiled faintly, but he was very surprised. He had used the heart of nothingness just now, but he couldn't devour the handprint on Lan's body. It showed how strong the power contained in the handprint was. The others were stunned for a long time before they reacted. Tian's method was really terrifying. Then, Tian didn't waste any time and directly said in a commanding tone, Dear City Lords, let's go to the heart of the Dark Sea in 3 days. Chapter 2432. 3 days later, in the sky above the second City Lord, 8 figures stood in a row. It was Tian and the others. After 3 days of rest, Tian's condition had recovered to its peak. However, his demon eye's pupil power still had not recovered. He originally thought that the demon eye would recover within 3 days, but now he realized that only a small part of the pupil power of the demon eye had recovered. According to this rate of recovery, it would take at least a month for the pupil power to completely recover. In other words, every time Tian used the demon eye, he would need a month to recover. And the use of the demon eye also needed to be stimulated by the power of the gods and demons. Therefore, although the demon eye was very scary, it was also very limited. Tian did not wait for too long. He was afraid that the Dark Emperor would know of his plan and be on guard. Lord Tian, let's go. Lan stood beside Tian and said lightly. Tian nodded slightly, and everyone moved together towards the heart of the Dark Sea. About half an hour later, everyone came to the sky above a dark sea. Below them was a large dark island. Is this the heart of the Dark Sea? Tian looked at the dark island below and frowned slightly. He sensed that the entire island was shrouded by a powerful force. This power was very strange. It somewhat resembled a spirit formation, yet it also resembled a restriction. Lord Nyetian, this island is the heart of the Dark Sea. We are now only at the outermost part of the heart of the Dark Sea, we are not close to the periphery of the heart of the Dark Sea. Qi Lan said solemnly, obviously recalling her past. Her eyes could not help but show some panic. Nye Tian nodded and said to Fat Cat, Fat, can you see anything? The heart of the ocean was obviously protected by a huge killing array. Hopefully, Fat Cat could see through the killing array and find a safe path for Nye Tian and the others. The Fat Cat was quiet for a while. After a long time she sighed and said, Nye Tian, the killing formation in front of us is very strange. The formation theory is strange, and the formation is unpredictable. If I want to break this killing formation, I'll need at least a few months. When Nye Tian heard the Fat Cat's words, he couldn't help but narrow his eyes and his expression turned ugly. This killing formation was indeed unique. Even the Fat Cat needed several months to decipher it. Unfortunately, Nye Tian did not have that much time. With so many of them coming to the heart of the Dark Sea, they would soon alarm the Dark Emperor. Moreover, Nye Tian was in a hurry, so he couldn't wait for several months. Looks like we can only force our way through the killing formation. Immediately, Nye Tian's eyes focused and said solemnly, Lord Nye Tian, are we really going to force our way through? Qi Lan gulped and looked at Nye Tian in shock. A faint smile appeared at the corner of Nye Tian's mouth as he nodded vigorously. Since they had already come to the heart of the ocean, there was no reason to turn around and leave. The other city lords looked at Nye Tian, then looked at the heart of the ocean below, and they also looked frightened. Qi Lan, with her strength, was injured by the killing formation. It could be seen how terrifying the killing formation was. Nye Tian, wait a moment. Give me some time. At this time, the Fat Cat's voice suddenly sounded. Nye Tian was stunned for a moment, but didn't ask too much. Then, the Fat Cat's figure appeared. Ignoring the surprised reaction of the spiritualist and the others, it continuously released the colored glass qi. After a while, a small formation formed by the colored glass qi appeared, and one could clearly see the 8 formation eyes. At this time, beads of sweat appeared on the Fat Cat's forehead. Its figure moved, and it returned to the origin fetus space. It said to Nye Tian, this is a miniature octagonal formation. You guys stay in the formation and suppress the formation eyes. With the octagonal formation as support, it will be easier to break the killing formation. Okay. Nye Tian nodded and smiled, and was the first to step into the octagonal formation. The other 7 city lords looked at each other, and also entered the formation. The 8 formation eyes were all occupied, and the octagonal formation slowly operated. Nye Tian felt that his body was surrounded by the power of the formation, which made his aura a lot stronger. The others also noticed this, and their faces were not small. Who would have thought that the Fat Cat that Nye Tian raised would have such a powerful method? Everyone, let's break through the formation together. Nye Tian smiled faintly, and his figure moved, and he swooped down. The 7 city lords all followed, maintaining the same formation, but there was an unconcealable fear on their faces. They also did not know what would happen next. Boom! Just as Nye Tian and the others were within 10,000 meters of the heart of the Dark Sea, they directly broke through the killing formation barrier in the space. With a boom, the killing formation was instantly activated. In the next moment, an extremely strange scene appeared. Boom! 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 On the surface of the sea, countless giant black trees suddenly sprang up, like a wild dragon breaking out of the abyss, and spread out in the void. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. One after another, the giant black trees grew in the air, and in an instant, they spread out in the entire space. The surface of the sea was directly filled up by the giant black trees. Nye Tian and the others felt as if they had come to a dark forest. Everyone looked at the forest of black trees below, unable to conceal the fear in their eyes. At this moment, Fat Cat's voice sounded, and there was a hint of panic in her voice. Before Nye Tian had time to ask more, he saw that the black trees below were actually connected one by one, and instantly formed a giant wood monster. The appearance of the wood monsters was somewhat similar to the tree people, but their sizes were different. The small ones were only a few meters large, and the big ones were hundreds or even thousands of meters large. This is the wood monster? Nye Tian was stunned for a moment, and then he shouted in surprise. Roar! Just as his voice fell, suddenly there was a shrill and ear-piercing roar from below, and all the wood monsters instantly went crazy, leaping into the air, and rushing towards Nye Tian and the others. The wood monsters stretched out their giant black wood arms, and waved them in the air, like wild snakes, dark and violent. Kill! Seeing a wood monster rushing up, Nye Tian directly roared, and directly stabbed out with his sword. The sword's shadow flew out like a shocking rainbow, and the brilliance of the sword bloomed for 10,000 meters. Boom! The moment the sword's shadow fell, there was a sound of an explosion, and the body of the wood monster was bombarded into pieces. Seeing this, Nye Tian slightly raised the corner of his mouth and murmured, "These wood monsters are not that strong." He killed a wood monster that was nearly 1,000 meters in size with one sword strike. Then wouldn't the smaller wood monsters be even more vulnerable? Boom! 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 At the same time, the 7 city lords also made their moves, and pieces of shattered black wood appeared in midair. City Lord Wu, is this the killing array you encountered? It's not that strong. Yuaning couldn't help but say proudly after they defeated the first wave of attack, and instantly killed many large wood monsters. Don't be careless. Qi Lan was very nervous and said loudly, "These wood monsters are not what you think. The larger the wood monsters are, the weaker they are, and the smaller wood monsters are the most terrifying." Hearing Qi Lan's words, everyone couldn't help but sink their eyes, and their faces became embarrassed. The wood monsters they had just killed were all large wood monsters, but the smaller wood monsters were stronger. Chapter 24:33. F. Countless wood spirits rushed over, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. Their tremendous power vibrated, and even the surrounding space was pulled taut. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed and his heart sank. This time, the wood demons were a lot smaller, but their auras were even more powerful. They looked ferocious and berserk, as if they wanted to eat people. Everyone, be careful. These wood demons are very powerful. Qi Lan roared. His eyes were trembling slightly. He had fought against these wood demons before, so he knew how terrifying they were. Swoosh, whoosh, whoosh. As soon as he finished his sentence, the group of wood monsters rushed over. Beams of black wood whipped down like steel whips, bombarding the octagonal formation. Seeing this, Nye Tian and the others released their auras at the same time. The octagonal array's power increased by several times, and a bright barrier appeared outside the array. Bang! 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 In the next moment, endless black wood fell on the octagonal formation, but it was blocked by the protective shield and shattered into pieces. Then, the wood demon army rushed over. Their pitch-black faces made them look like ghosts, and they kept screaming. At the same time, they waved their arms, trying to tear the octagonal formation apart. The octagonal formation was completely surrounded by the wood demons. In front of Nye Tian and the others, there was only darkness. Attack! At this moment, Nye Tian let out a low roar and slashed out with the starlight heaven slash. The sword image was like a dragon as it charged out and bombarded the group of wood demons. Boom! With a loud explosion, the sword shadow shattered countless wood demons and opened up a path. Charge forward! Nye Tian roared. His figure moved and he rushed forward. The 7 city lords followed closely behind Nye Tian, maintaining the octagonal formation. With the protection of the octagonal formation, Nye Tian and the others' battle prowess had increased significantly. Even when facing the 100-meter-long wood demons, they could still deal with them with ease. However, there were too many wood demons in the entire killing formation. They were packed together like a sea of black wood. Nye Tian and the others relied on the octagonal formation to charge left and right, but they could not find a way to break through the killing formation. Roar! Immediately after, another wave of wood demons rushed up, and their ear-piercing roars resounded through the killing array. Guard the eye of the array, Nye Tian growled in a low voice. At the same time, he stabbed out with his sword, and the sword's shadow blasted out a path. The octagonal formation was like a moving hill. It instantly rushed out and crushed countless wood demons. Unfortunately, there were too many wood demons, and the smallest and scariest wood demon was madly rushing over. Nye Tian rushed down. The passageway to the heart of the dark sea is at the bottom. At this time, the fat cat's voice rang out anxiously. Nye Tian was taken aback. His demonic eye flickered. Through the endless wood spirits, he could see a clear channel in the sea below. "City lords, follow me closely," shouted Nye Tian. Sword intent exploded from his body as he slashed down with the starlight heaven slash. Rumble! Suddenly, the sword's shadow was like a raging dragon, rushing through countless wood demons. Endless black wood shattered in the air, turning into sawdust and scattering. Nye Tian's figure moved, and he dove down. The others were shocked by Nye Tian's actions, and cold sweat broke out on their backs. Nye Tian was actually rushing down. The wood demons below were even more concentrated, and the smallest and most violent wood demons were all concentrated below. No one could figure out what Nye Tian was trying to do. But they reacted very quickly, and without any hesitation, they followed closely behind Nye Tian. QL11 at this time, they could only choose to believe in Nye Tian. Rumble! Nye Tian dove down, sword shadow opening a path. The power of gods and demons was released wildly, and endless sword intent was released. Wherever his figure passed, countless black wood flew, and there were ghostly wails and wolf howls. But as his figure descended, Nye Tian felt that the resistance was getting stronger and stronger, and he gradually slowed down. Roar, roar, roar! At this time, an incomparably mournful roar sounded, and the wood demons below suddenly scattered, as if they were hit by something. Nye Tian's eyes suddenly froze, and he felt several terrifying auras appear. Bang! 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 The next moment, after several muffled sounds, 3 wood demons that were only a few meters tall appeared. They moved very quickly, and they attacked Nye Tian and the others. These wood demons looked 70 to 80% similar to humans, but their bodies were as black as charcoal, and they looked very frightening. Wood Demon Kings. Qi Lan saw the small wood demons, and his eyes couldn't help but tremble, and he shouted in surprise. He was all too familiar with these small wood demons, because the black handprint on his chest was caused by these small wood demons. Although these small wood demons were very small, their strength was very strong, and they were worthy of being called Wood Demon Kings. Why is this little thing's aura so strong? The spiritualist and the others looked at the Wood Demon Kings, and they couldn't help but gasp. The aura that the Wood Demon Kings emitted was even more terrifying than these city lords. Roar! At this time, a Wood Demon King had already rushed over, and with a mournful roar, its black arm fiercely fell, directly bombarding the octagonal formation. Kaboom! The octagonal formation was bombarded, and there was a crisp sound. On the outer shield of the formation, a dazzling crack appeared. **T. Seeing this, Nye Tian couldn't help but scream in his heart. The Wood Demon King's strength was too strong, and with a casual attack, it actually broke the octagonal formation's shield. Bang! Bang! In the next moment, the other 2 Wood Demon Kings rushed over, and at the same time, the octagonal formation's shield immediately shattered. Suddenly, the octagonal formation shook, as if it was going to be broken in the next moment. Seeing this, the 7 city lords all gasped, and their faces were extremely shocked. Everyone, don't panic, we must protect the formation eye. At this critical moment, Nye Tian roared, and at the same time, the 9 yuan meridians in his body started to operate crazily, and a majestic and vast dragon energy was released, surging in the space. Roar, roar, roar. At the same time, the 3 wood demon kings let out a strange roar, and at the same time, their eyes locked on Nie Tian, and in their pitch-black eyes, there was an eerie coldness. In an instant, the 3 wood demon kings moved together, and like 3 black rays, they bombarded Nie Tian. "Get out of my way!" Nie Tian roared, and the dragon energy in his body instantly condensed, and suddenly exploded, and a giant red dragon appeared. Roar! Immediately after, the dragon's roar shook the sky, and the surrounding large wood demons directly collapsed, and the slightly smaller wood demons were shaken, and continuously retreated. The 3 wood demon kings, however, were fearless, and like 3 black sharp blades, they actually penetrated the giant dragon's body, and attacked Nie Tian. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The 3 wood demon kings pierced through the dragon's body, and an ear-piercing sound came from the air. Seeing the 3 black shadows in front of him getting closer and closer, Nie Tian couldn't help but tremble. He didn't expect the wood demon kings to be so strong, and they could easily penetrate the dragon's shadow. The 3 wood demon kings passed through the dragon's chi, and madly attacked, releasing a fierce aura from their bodies. At the same time, they waved their black arms, and smashed fiercely towards Nie Tian. At this moment, Nie Tian felt the real breath of death. In this situation, he couldn't fight back at all. However, the 3 wood demon kings were equivalent to 3 experts who were close to the peak of the immortal state. Even if Nie Tian's martial body was strong, he couldn't withstand such a terrifying attack. Nie Tian. At the moment of life and death, a voice suddenly sounded in Nie Tian's divine sense. This was a completely unfamiliar voice, but it made Nie Tian feel inexplicably familiar and intimate. Chapter 2434. The unfamiliar voice made Nie Tian feel an inexplicable sense of familiarity. He almost subconsciously shouted the 2 words, and then his whole body stiffened. Nie Tian. At that moment, another voice rang out, startling Nie Tian. Nie Tian. At this time, the 3 wood demon kings had already arrived beside him, and were less than a few meters away. Swoosh, swoosh. 3 terrifying forces came head-on, and the cold aura was suffocating. Nie Tian almost subconsciously raised his arm, and his whole body's aura was as majestic as a mountain, majestic and powerful. He threw out a punch, without any fancy moves, but it caused the surrounding space to tremble, and a violent fist force whizzed out. Bang, bang, bang. In the next moment, 3 muffled sounds were heard, and the 3 figures of the wood demon kings were all sent flying, and their bodies directly collapsed in the air, turning into a pile of sawdust. Everyone was taken aback by the sudden turn of events, and stared at Nie Tian in astonishment. 3 wood demon kings, 3 powerhouses that were close to the peak of the immortal state, were killed by Nie Tian with 1 punch. If they did not see it with their own eyes, no one would believe the scene in front of them. The 7 city lords were all powerhouses, and they could naturally feel the power of the wood demon kings. But Nie Tian just casually punched and killed 3 wood demon kings. This was too strange. How did Nie Tian do it? The 7 city lords were puzzled, but Nie Tian himself was even more puzzled. In that instant, he felt the power of 9,000 fiend gods awaken again, and it was more violent than before. The feeling of power that was about to burst out made him feel like his whole body was about to explode. But this feeling only lasted for a moment. At this moment, Nie Tian had already returned to normal. What is going on? And that inexplicable voice, where did it come from? Nie Tian was very sure that the voice just now must have come from his mother, Qi Wuyunxiu. But now, the voice had disappeared, and everything had returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. Just as Nie Tian was feeling puzzled, the fat cat's voice rang out again, shouting anxiously, Nie Tian, don't just stand there. Let's enter the passage below first. City lords, follow me. Nye Tian reacted. He didn't have time to think too much. His figure moved and he rushed down. Without the obstruction of the Wood Demon King, his speed was very fast. In the blink of an eye, everyone arrived at the bottom and landed in a passage above the sea. This passageway is the entrance to the heart of the Dark Sea. Nye Tian cried out in pleasant surprise. His figure moved and he dashed forward madly. The 7 city lords followed closely, not daring to be careless. Nye Tian and the others followed the passageway, and after a while, they entered an underground tunnel. Feeling that the surroundings were safe, Nye Tian and the others slowed down. The 7 city lords followed closely behind Nye Tian, unable to hide the shock on their faces. The scene just now was too strange. Now that they thought about it, they were still in shock. Nye Tian killed 3 Wood Demon Kings with 1 punch. How did he do it? Nye Tian had the same doubts in his heart. Fat, what happened just now? Nye Tian couldn't help but ask Fat Cat with a frown, what happened just now? Nye Tian, did you hear that voice just now? Fat Cat hesitated and asked. Yes. Nye Tian nodded heavily and said hesitantly, it was an unfamiliar voice, but I felt inexplicably familiar. Speaking up to hear, he paused, and his eyes narrowed slightly. He said, I think that was my mother's voice. Perhaps saying this would make Fat Cat feel very strange. But this was Nye Tian's true thoughts. Fat Cat let out a long breath and said, Nye Tian, that was indeed your mother's voice. It's true. Nye Tian's eyes trembled, and he almost cried out in surprise. Although he was very sure of this, when Fat Cat confirmed it, he still couldn't hide his excitement. The voice that sounded in his divine sense just now was really his mother. Nye Tian's eyes flashed violently, and his heart was very shocked. He didn't understand why Chiwu Yunxio's voice suddenly sounded. Nye Tian, I think we've found the right person this time. Fat Cat's face was gloomy and said, Your mother is indeed imprisoned in the heart of the Dark Sea, and we're very close to her. Nye Tian's eyes suddenly shrank, and then he calmed down and asked with fiery eyes, Fat, are you sure? I'm sure. Fat Cat nodded heavily and said, The reason why your mother can talk to you must be because of the power of the seal in your body. This means that your mother is very close to us. When Nye Tian heard Fat Cat's words, his face suddenly stiffened, and his whole body froze on the spot. He was already so close to his mother. Lord Nye Tian, are you okay? The spiritualist saw Nye Tian frozen on the spot, and stepped forward to ask. Nye Tian reacted, and slightly waved his hand, indicating that he was fine, but his eyes were extremely fiery. He suppressed the excitement in his heart and sped up. After a while, Nye Tian and the others walked out of the tunnel, and in front of them was a thorny forest. Boom! At this time, Nye Tian suddenly felt a roar in his body, as if there was a huge power slowly awakening. Nye Tian, don't come over! Almost at the same time, a voice was heard, very clear, and resounded in Nye Tian's divine sense. Although the voice was urgent, it was very pleasant to listen to, and it had the magnetism of a mother, making one feel an indescribable warmth. Mother! Nye Tian suddenly realized what was going on, and his expression changed drastically as he cried out in alarm. This voice was the voice that he had heard before. He was even closer to Chiwu Yunxio. It's right in front. Fat Cat's voice was heard, and with a strange cry, its figure appeared, and pointed at the thorny forest in front of them. Nye Tian nodded, and in a flash, he sprinted towards the thorny forest. He moved like lightning, and in the blink of an eye, he passed through the forest, and what appeared in front of him was a huge abyss. The abyss was tens of thousands of meters wide, and at a glance it was bottomless and gave off a chilling aura. At this moment, Nye Tian felt that the blood in his body was inexplicably agitated, and the sea of demons and celestial demons in the origin fetus space instantly became violent, as if it was boiling. It's here. Nie Tian looked at the bottomless abyss and shouted excitedly. Without a doubt, Chiwu Yunxiu was imprisoned in this bottomless abyss. At this moment, Chiwu Yunxiu's voice was heard once again, and it sounded very anxious. Nie Tian, leave this place now. Mother! Nie Tian looked at the abyss in front of him, and his eyes were trembling. He was already here, and he was going to see his mother soon. How could he leave? Lord Nie Tian. At this moment the 7 city leaders appeared, and they came to Nie Tian's side. What is this place? They looked at the abyss in front of them, and they could not help but gasp, and their faces were full of fear. The abyss was too intimidating, and it seemed to hide endless darkness, making people feel hopeless. Chapter 24:35. Nie Tian. Nie Tian's sudden action caused everyone to exclaim in unison. Who would have thought that Nie Tian would jump directly into the abyss? He did not know what was in the abyss at all. Wouldn't it be dangerous for him to jump straight in? Nie Tian indeed did not know how dangerous the abyss was, but he knew that his mother was imprisoned in the abyss. As a son, facing his imprisoned mother, even if the sky fell and the earth split apart, he would not be afraid. Nie Tian's figure instantly disappeared, submerged in the abyss. The 7 city lords looked at each other, hesitating whether to enter the abyss or not. Everyone, if you don't go down, then wait here. The spiritualist's eyes flickered, and he was the first to speak. Then, he took a step out and fell into the abyss. The other city lords were stunned. They did not expect the spiritualist to be so decisive, actually following him into the abyss. They were stunned for a moment, looked at each other, and finally decided to enter the abyss. Since they had already come to the heart of the dark sea, if they did not go in and take a look, it would inevitably be a pity in their hearts. More importantly, Nie Tian and the spiritualist had already gone down. If they did not go, there would definitely be a rift between them and Nie Tian. This was something they did not want to see. The 6 city lords no longer hesitated. Their figures jumped together and entered the abyss. At the same time, in the abyss, Nie Tian's figure fell extremely low, and he slowly felt that there was a burning aura coming from below. As he got closer and closer to the bottom of the abyss, he felt that the burning aura was more intense. This feeling was like he was falling towards a huge furnace. After a moment, Nie Tian saw the surrounding space gradually become bright. He looked down and found that the cliffs around the abyss were actually flowing with crimson magma. The light in the space was coming from the crimson magma. He stabilized his body and slowed down his descent. Following the magma, Nie Tian felt that the burning aura in the space was getting stronger, making him feel like he was in a furnace. Continuing downwards, Nie Tian's forehead was covered in beads of sweat, and his whole body was sweating profusely. He estimated that the temperature here was over 1,000 degrees Celsius. Cultivators below Overgod would probably be roasted instantly if they entered. He was extremely cautious as he spread out his divine sense to investigate the situation below. QL11 feeling that he was about to reach the bottom of the abyss, he looked down and saw a huge magma lake. Above the lake, tongues of fire were boiling and leaping about ceaselessly, as if they wanted to burn everything. At this moment, Nie Tian felt the blood in his body become restless, as if it was boiling. The Fiend God ocean in the space of the Fiend God nascent embryo was turbulent. Waves of Fiend God energy crashed violently, creating terrifying waves. Mother! Nie Tian's eyes suddenly trembled. He stared at the magma lake and shouted with a trembling expression. He could sense that Chiwu Yunxiu was nearby. Boom! At this moment, a violent tongue of fire suddenly rose from the magma lake and rushed into the air. Nie Tian was stunned and instinctively took a step back. The next moment, the scene that appeared in front of him completely stunned him. The tongue of fire froze in the air and gradually became clearer. It was a person. That figure's entire body was flowing with scarlet magma. His entire body seemed to be burning, constantly releasing violent flames. It was hard to imagine that a person could survive in such an extreme environment. Nye Tian looked at the figure of fire and was stunned. His lips were trembling, but he could not make a sound. Nye Tian, my child, you've come after all. At this moment, the figure of fire spoke. It was elegant, gentle, and kind. Although the voice was a little weak, it was the voice that Nye Tian had heard before. Without a doubt, this figure of fire was Nye Tian's mother, Chiwu Yunxiu. Chiwu Yunxiu's lips trembled slightly. To her, even the slightest movement would bring about great pain. However, for Nye Tian, for her child, she was willing to endure any pain. Under the cover of the magma, Chiwu Yunxiu's face was very blurry. However, from her facial features, one could tell that she was a peerless beauty. Mother, mother! Nye Tian was stunned for a few seconds. Finally, he reacted and opened his mouth slightly. Even his lips were trembling slightly. He never thought that the scene of mother and son reuniting would be like this. He could even feel the pain that Chiwu Yunxiu was enduring at this moment. The burning magma enveloped her body, and her skin was constantly being melted. This pain was not heart-wrenching, but deep into her soul. He could not imagine how Chiwu Yunxiu had endured for so many years. Sigh. When Chiwu Yunxiu heard Nye Tian's shout, her bloodshot eyes trembled. 2 pools of tears flashed across her eyes. Even though the magma was flowing down her face, one could still see how agitated she was. However, this agitation brought her even greater pain. However, her heart was filled with happiness, contentment, and bliss. Mother, don't move. I'm here to save you. Nye Tian was suddenly aware of Chiwu Yunxiu's pain. Suppressing the agitation and anger in his heart, he dashed towards Chiwu Yunxiu. Nye Tian, don't come near me. However, Chiwu Yunxiu screamed in horror. It was as if something terrible was about to happen. Unfortunately, it was too late. Swoosh. Nye Tian moved instantly. However, just as he was about to approach Chiwu Yunxiu, a voice rang out. Immediately, a crimson flame chain surged out from Chiwu Yunxiu's body. Swoosh. In an instant, the flame chain slithered out like a giant snake and attacked Nye Tian. Everything happened too suddenly. Nye Tian was completely defenseless. He could only activate the heavenly light armor subconsciously. Bam! In the next instant, the flaming chains bombarded the extreme yang sky armor, shattering it with a resounding boom. The flame chain hit Nye Tian's chest and penetrated his body. Nye Tian let out a blood-curdling screech as he was sent flying backward and smashed heavily into the lava-flowing cliff. Upon seeing this, Chiwu Yunxiu couldn't help but exclaim, Nye Tian. His blurry face instantly froze. She knew very well how powerful the flame chain was. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been trapped in the magma lake. Mother, I'm fine. Nye Tian stabilized his body in the air and said while enduring the pain. His chest was penetrated by the flame chain. He felt as if the wound was being roasted by flames. His entire body was about to burn. He immediately released the heart of nihility to forcefully devour the flames around the wound to stabilize his condition. What is this? Nye Tian fixed his eyes on the flame chain in the air and growled cold. Bone-eroding soul shackling chain. At this moment, he heard the voice of Fat Cat in his divine sense. As soon as little Fat Cat's voice fell, a terrifying scene unfolded before them. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Flaming chains surged out from Chiwu Yunxiu's body. They were like giant flaming snakes that surrounded her body. Chapter 2436. 9 flaming chains coiled around Chiwu Yunxiu like giant flaming snakes, wrapping around her entire body. What the hell are these damn chains? Nye Tian was thoroughly infuriated by what had just happened, and bellowed furiously. Nye Tian, calm down. These are bone-eroding soul shackles. They are very scary. Don't get close to them. Fat Cat warned Nye Tian anxiously. Damn it! At this moment, Nye Tian was enraged. His blood qi was surging, and his sword intent was surging like raging waves. "Break it!" Then, like a wild beast, he roared and slashed with starlight heavenly slash. A sword shadow flew out. Kaboom! The sword shadow landed on the bone-eroding soul shackles, but to no avail. The bone-eroding soul shackles did not break at all. Ah! Right at this moment, Chi Wu Yunxio's miserable scream sounded out. It was a heart-wrenching scream that was incomparably mournful. "Mother!" Nie Tian's pupils contracted when he heard the voice. He became much calmer. It was obvious that his attack had caused great pain to Chi Wu Yunxio. I'm fine," Chi Wu Yunxio said in a trembling voice. Her body was trembling as she endured the pain. "Nie Tian, calm down," Fat Cat said angrily. "The bone-eroding soul shackles are not something you can break. Your recklessness will only make your mother suffer more." Nie Tian's expression froze for a moment before he calmed down and said in a serious tone, "Mother, don't worry. I'll definitely get you out of here." Yes. I believe in you." Chi Wu Yunxio nodded. The tears in her eyes evaporated before they flowed out. Nie Tian calmed himself down and asked in a serious tone, "Little fatty, what exactly is this bone-eroding soul shackle?" The bone-eroding soul shackling chains are a type of curse shackles. The flaming chains you see aren't physical, but are formed by curse runes. Seeing that Nie Tian became cold, the Fat Cat said in a deep voice, "These spell runes are stored in your mother's body. When she senses danger, they will automatically come out." Nie Tian narrowed his eyes and asked, "What's the use of these runes?" "Devour bone. Soul refinement," the Fat Cat said solemnly. "Not only can the curse shackles slowly corrode a martial artist's bones and meridians, it can also slowly refine a martial artist's soul and bloodline power. Furthermore, the process of eroding the bones and refining the soul is extremely slow. On the other hand, the curse shackles can ensure that the martial artist does not die, making the martial artist suffer unimaginable pain." Bastard! When Nie Tian heard this, he lost control of his emotions again and roared crazily. At this moment, he finally understood why Chi Wu Yunxio was imprisoned in the lava lake but did not die. It was because of the curse shackles in her body. The person who did this to her did not want to kill her, but to torture her to the fullest extent. "Nie Tian, calm down." The Fat Cat reminded Nie Tian again to calm down. What had already happened. No amount of anger would help. The most important thing now was that Chi Wu Yunxio was still alive. Nie Tian took a deep breath, forced himself to calm down, and asked in a deep voice, "Little fatty, how can I save my mother?" When the Fat Cat heard Nie Tian's question, it fell silent and did not speak for a long time. If Nie Tian wanted to save Chi Wu Yunxio, he would have to destroy the bone-eroding soul shackles or pull it out. However, the Fat Cat had already sensed that the bone-eroding soul shackles in Chi Wu Yunxio's body was so powerful that it could only be destroyed by a demi-saint or a pseudo-saint. Nie Tian's current ability was too far away from that of a demi-saint or a pseudo-saint. Moreover, there was not a single demi-saint in the entire 9 realms. "Is there any way, Fat?" Nie Tian asked again, seeing that the Fat Cat had not spoken for a long time. "No." The Fat Cat shook its head helplessly and answered truthfully. "Unless a demi-saint appears, or the one who planted the curse shackles would remove the curse on their own." Nie Tian's face stiffened, his entire body frozen. The Fat Cat's words were no different from a thunderclap that he could not accept. He had finally found his mother. She was right before his eyes, and she was suffering tremendous pain every single moment. And yet, he was powerless. How could he accept that? Impossible. It's impossible. There must be a way. Nie Tian roared out of the blue as if he had gone mad. Nie Tian, don't be so agitated. Before the Fat Cat could speak, Chi Wu Yunxio's voice rang. "I know very well how frightening the bone-eroding soul shackles are. Ever since the first day I was imprisoned here, I never thought that I could get out alive. I'm already very content to be able to see you once before I die. It's just a pity that I won't be able to see your father again. Our family of 3 will never be able to reunite. Mother, don't say any more. Nye Tian could not bear to listen any longer. With a low growl, his eyes welled with hot tears. He clenched his fists tightly, his blazing eyes almost bloodshot as he solemnly said, I will save Mother even if I die. Every word, every sentence, every word like blood. My child. Chiwu Yunxio's heart trembled. Her body trembled slightly, and she could no longer speak. She was extremely proud to have such an outstanding son. What a great show! The deep love between mother and son. At this moment, a cold voice suddenly rang out. Such a touching scene. I want to cry. Another voice rang out, echoing in the abyss. It was harsh and mocking. Who's there? Nye Tian suddenly raised his head. He saw 6 figures standing in the distance. These 6 figures stood in the air. Although they had different expressions, their appearances were exactly the same. And they looked exactly the same as Li Juhan and Li Qi. Obviously, these 6 people were the Dark Emperor's secondary bodies, just like Li Qi and Li Juhan. These 6 people had been hiding somewhere, and now they appeared like ghosts. Who are you? Nye Tian's eyes were as cold as killing intent as he stared at the 6 of them. I heard that you've already killed Li Qi and Li Jiu. Now that you've seen us, can't you guess who we are? One of them said coldly. His tone was full of mockery. You're the same as Li Qi. You're all the Dark Emperor's secondary bodies. Nye Tian said in a deep voice. His eyes were full of killing intent. That's right. We've been waiting for you here for a long time. I didn't expect you to come so quickly. You even let us watch a show of deep love between mother and son for free. Another person said coldly with a face full of contempt. It was obvious that these 6 people had been waiting in the abyss for a long time. They just didn't show up. Very well. Nye Tian's lips twitched. His killing intent surged to the extreme. He said coldly, If I can't kill the Dark Emperor, I'll kill you first. You? Another Dark Emperor's secondary body said with a face full of contempt. These 6 secondary bodies were no weaker than Li Qi, and were all very close to the peak of the god realm. Nye Tian was only a mid-paramount god. How could he possibly take on 6 of them by himself? There's still us. However, just as the deputy's voice faded, a powerful voice rang out from the sky. Chapter 2437. The 7 city lords appeared at the same time, and their auras were so powerful that the space around them started to tremble. Nye Tian's eyes lit up when he saw the 7 city lords. He didn't expect them to follow him into the abyss. The 7 city lords were very cautious when they entered the abyss, so they were a little slow. QL11 Fortunately, they appeared at the right time. Judging from the strength of the 7 of you, you should be the 7 city lords of the main cities, right? The 6 Dark Emperor subbodies were stunned at first, but one of them sneered and said in disdain, I really didn't expect this kid to have so many city lords working for him in just a few days. Another subbody said coldly with a smile on his face. It was obvious that the 6 subbodies did not take the 7 city lords seriously. We only found out now that Li Juhan is not the son of the Dark Emperor, but the subbody of the Dark Emperor, the spiritualist replied with a smile and cold. What's the use of knowing more when you're about to die? One of the subbodies sneered and said, Attack! In the blink of an eye, the 6 secondary bodies moved in unison and charged towards the 7 city lords. The auras of the 6 of them were extremely powerful. When they were released at the same time and fused together, the surging momentum seemed to be able to destroy heaven and earth. Whoosh! The 6 of them attacked at the same time and 6 forces merged together. A blackwood claw appeared in the void and shrouded the 7 city lords. *T. The 7 city lords felt the murderous aura and screamed at the same time. The joint attack of the 6 subbodies was too terrifying. Even an immortal state warrior would be killed on the spot. Although the strength of the 6 subbodies was only close to the immortal state warrior, they came from the same body and had the same aura. When they joined forces, their aura was even stronger than that of an immortal state warrior. Attack! The 7 city lords were all powerful warriors and reacted instantly. They released their auras at the same time and joined forces. Then, they attacked at the same time and the 7 forces merged to form a huge palm shadow. Huh! Nietion's eyes narrowed when he saw this. It was a rare sight to see a battle between 13 experts at the pinnacle. Boom! In the next moment, the Blackwood Claw collided with the enormous palm shadow, and a loud rumble erupted in the sky. Waves of explosive force surged out and wreaked havoc in the space. The lava on the cliffs around the abyss crumbled under the impact, and the blazing aura in the air became even more intense. Boom! Chi. The 2 forces were too powerful to destroy each other, so they could only devour and tear each other apart, making ear-piercing noises in the air. Boom! A moment later, an explosion rang out, and the enormous palm shadow formed by the 7 city lords collapsed. In the next instant, Heimu's sharp claws descended, and the 7 city lords were sent flying, slamming heavily into the cliff. There were even a few people whose bodies were deeply embedded in the cliff. 7 great city lords? The 6 deputies stabilized their bodies. One of them sneered and said insolently, "A pile of dog shit." The 6 subbodies joined forces and defeated the 7 city lords with just one move. Although this outcome was unexpected, if one thought about it carefully, it was not surprising at all. In fact, the strength of the 7 great city lords was not weaker than the Dark Emperor subbody. However, the 6 Dark Emperor subbodies came from the same source, and their auras were completely the same. They had a tacit understanding with each other, and their auras could be perfectly integrated. And the 7 great city lords even had different attributes. Even if they joined forces, they could not burst out with too much power. If it was a one-on-one fight, the 7 great city lords could definitely kill the 6 subbodies. But if they joined forces to fight, the 7 great city lords could only be the ones being oppressed. Damn it! 5th City Lord Chi-Lan's figure stabilized, and he growled, blood hanging from the corner of his mouth. His strength was considered strong among the 7 city lords, so his injury was not serious. There were 3 slightly weaker city lords who were already covered in blood, seriously injured, and had lost the power to fight. With this kind of trash strength, you are also worthy of being a city lord. What a joke! Another deputy's voice sounded, extremely sarcastic. Chi-Lan and the others looked extremely embarrassed. They did not expect that the 6 deputies' strength would be so strong when they joined forces. City lords, stand down, Nietion said, glaring at the 6th deputy like a vicious wolf. We defeated 7 city lords with a single move, you brat. You're just a piece of mid-paramount god trash. How dare you be so arrogant? One of the deputy's cold eyes looked at Nietion with contempt and provocation. We defeated 7 city magistrates with a single move, you brat. How dare a piece of trash like you, a mid-paramount god, act so arrogant? One of his lieutenants said, looking at Nietion with cold, provocative eyes. Why don't you give it a try? Nietion said with a cold smile, his voice deep and filled with killing intent. Are you looking to die? The deputy roared furiously. His body flickered into motion as he attacked. Rumble! A palm descended, and a Blackwood ghost claw appeared, which slashed viciously toward Nietion. The corner of Nietion's mouth twitched, but there was no fear in his eyes. Instead, he was filled with killing intent. He raised his arm slightly and punched out with the force of 10,000 caddies in his palm. Rumble! A black fist appeared, which pounced forward like a wild beast and shattered the Blackwood ghost claw. Bam! Following that, a muffled sound was heard as the secondary body was sent flying. While it was still in the air, it shattered and turned into a pile of sawdust that dissipated. This sudden scene caused the other subbodies to be startled, and then they cried out in unison, old 6. They were the 6 most powerful subordinates of the Dark Sovereign. They were Li 1, Li 2, Li 3, Li 4, Li 5, and Li 6. The one who had just been killed by Nie Tian was none other than Li 6. Upon seeing Li 6's death, the eyes of the other 5 secondary bodies flickered as they fixed their eyes on Nie Tian, flabbergasted. How could they have ever imagined that Nie Tian would be so strong? Nie Tian hovered there in midair, the power of 9,000 devils surging around him, making him look like a devil god looking down on everything. At this moment, Chiwu Yunxiu looked even more pained. Once again, she activated the sealing power in Nie Tian's body to help Nie Tian awaken the power of 9,000 devils. Nie Tian sensed that the devilish divine power seemed to be even more violent than before. Even he was shocked by the dark aura it emanated. All of you must die. At this moment Nie Tian spoke. His lips curled into a cold, murderous intent, and his eyes were filled with murderous intent. The 5 deputies were shrouded by the murderous intent. They trembled at the same time, and their expressions were filled with unconcealable fear. In front of Nie Tian, they felt like lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Die obediently. In the next moment, Nie Tian spoke in a low voice. His figure moved, and the power of the devils around him condensed into a suit of armor, making him look like a dark giant. Bam! He punched out, and a huge black fist shadow, with an unparalleled force, pressed down on the 5 secondary bodies. The 5 deputies felt the aura of death approaching them, and the fear in their hearts was displayed perfectly on their faces. Chapter 24:38. Boom! Boom! In the void, under the illumination of the crimson lava, 2 dark fist shadows roared like dragons and shook the heavens and earth. Bang! Bang! In the next instant, the 2 fists collided with each other and a muffled sound was heard, followed by an explosion. One of the fist shadows was shattered. Boom! Boundless energy surged and turned into dark energy that struck the void. The surrounding lava cliffs were ignited with tongues of fire that were dozens of meters long. At the same time, 5 figures were sent flying and smashed into the lava cliff. As for the other silver figure, dark energy surged around him, making him look like a fiend god descending to the world. He had a supreme posture, looking down on the world. One punch. With just one punch, Nie Tian had severely injured the 5 Dark Emperor subbodies. The 7 city lords were dumbfounded by the scene in front of them. Their eyes trembled violently and they were completely speechless. The power that Nie Tian had displayed was even stronger than that of a peak immortal state warrior. After one punch, the 5 Dark Emperor subbodies were all severely injured. The Dark Emperor subbodies are just SOSO, Nie Tianling said coldly and stepped forward. His body was filled with dark energy and murderous intent. The 5 subbodies crawled out of the lava cliff. Their bodies were covered in blood and their auras were weak, as if they were going to disappear at any time. Nie Tian's punch had severely injured the 5 subbodies, and they were on the verge of death. At this moment, they had no strength to resist at all. However, at this moment, Nie Tian suddenly felt that the godfiend power in his body had suddenly weakened. He frowned in confusion. Nie Tian. Immediately afterwards, a weak voice echoed in his ears. It was none other than Chiwu Yunxiu. Mother! Nie Tian turned around and saw Chiwu Yunxiu's body trembling. The bone-eroding soul shackling chains on her body were tightening bit by bit, causing her great pain. Seeing this, Nie Tian's figure flashed over. However, this time, the bone-eroding soul shackling chains did not react and continued to flow back into Chiwu Yunxiu's body. Chiwu Yunxiu's body trembled even more violently. Her face was contorted in agony. Oh no! Suddenly, the fat cat's voice rang out. She cried out in alarm, her deep blue eyes trembling. Fatty, what happened? Nie Tian cried out in alarm. He was extremely anxious, but he didn't dare to act rashly. He didn't know what had happened, but he was afraid that his actions would only make the situation worse. Chi Wu Yunxiu fell into an even more intense pain, but the fat cat seemed to be stunned and did not speak for a long time. Fatty, what's going on? Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he growled. He vaguely sensed that something bad was about to happen. Nie Tian. The fat cat finally spoke. His voice was trembling violently as he tried his best to control his tongue. Your mother, might not be able to make it. Can't make it? Nie Tian's eyes suddenly trembled, and the blood in his body flowed in reverse. He looked like he was about to lose his mind. He roared, "What do you mean? What do you mean?" The fat cat's expression froze when he saw Nie Tian's intense reaction. He suddenly felt that Chi Wu Yunxiu's strength had suddenly weakened, and her aura had become unstable. Even the bone-eroding soul shackling chains could not help her maintain the stability of her aura. Chi Wu Yunxiu must have used too much of her strength to help Nie Tian control the seal in her body. That was why she suffered the backlash from the seal. Because the person who controlled the seal was Chi Wu Yunxiu, not Nie Tian, the person who suffered the backlash was also Chi Wu Yunxiu. The strength of the seal in Nie Tian's body was unknown to Nie Tian, not to mention Chi Wu Yunxiu. Even the fat cat could only make a guess. Chi Wu Yunxiu could no longer hold on after suffering the backlash from the seal. At this moment, Chi Wu Yunxiu could no longer endure the ravages of the bone-corroding soul shackling chains. In the end, she would only die. Nie Tian, don't force yourself. At this moment, Chi Wu Yunxiu's voice was heard. There was a hint of relief in her voice. I'm already very satisfied to be able to see you before I die. Mother, I won't allow you to say such things. Nie Tian's eyes were filled with tears. He shouted, I won't allow you to give up. I won't allow you to die. I won't give up, and you can't give up either. As he spoke, Nie Tian took a step forward and grabbed the two bone-eroding soul shackling chains with both hands. He forcefully pulled them back so that the cursed shackling chains wouldn't return to Chi Wu Yunxiu's body. He knew that if all 9 bone-eroding soul shackling chains returned to Chi Wu Yunxiu's body, she would be dead for sure. Sizzle! The moment his body touched the bone-eroding soul shackling chains, the soul shackling flames on the cursed shackling chains burned his skin, making an ear-piercing sound. Nie Tian's arms were instantly set ablaze. His flesh was instantly burned, and his bones could be seen clearly. It was unimaginable how painful it was to have one's flesh and blood burned. However, Nie Tian didn't care at all. Starlight energy surged out of his body and forcefully pulled back the bone-eroding soul shackling chains. What he was holding onto was not the bone-eroding soul shackling chains, but his mother's life. No matter how painful it was, how could he let go? At that moment, the two bone-eroding soul shackling chains suddenly became violent. The soul shackling flames exploded, and the flames spread to Nie Tian's entire body, burning him up. Lord Nie Tian. Seeing this scene, the 7 city lords cried out in surprise, their expressions lifeless. The scene in front of them was too shocking. Nie Tian would rather have his body burned than let go. Nie Tian, let go, let go! Chi Wu Yunxiu saw Nie Tian's body burning, and she used the last bit of her strength to scream. Her voice was heart-wrenching, and it made one's soul tremble. As a mother, how could she stand by and watch her own child being burned alive? The 5 Dark Emperor's subbodies were dumbfounded. Their shocked eyes seemed to be saying, "Is he crazy?" In the eyes of the 5 subbodies, Chi Wu Yunxiu's aura was too weak, and she was definitely a dead person. Was Nie Tian crazy? He was using his own life to save someone who was going to die. Nie Tian was not crazy, because the person he was saving was his mother. Even if it was impossible, he would never let go. I won't let go. Nie Tian's body was covered in flames, and he roared. Every word shook the heavens and earth. Nie Tian, let go or you will die. Chi Wu Yunxiu's body trembled, and tears flowed out of her eyes. Even if I die, I won't let go. Nie Tian roared. He allowed his body to burn in the soul-shackling flames, but his hands were still holding on to the bone-eroding soul-shackling chains, not letting the chains move. Fat Cat was stunned when she saw Nye Tian's determination. QL11 at that moment, he seemed to have thought of something. His blue eyes trembled, and he exclaimed, "I have an idea." "What idea?" Nye Tian roared, and his burning eyes surged with unconcealable fanaticism. "Spell transfer," Fat Cat exclaimed, but his expression was complicated. Chapter 2439. Fat Cat had just come up with the idea of transferring the curse. He saw that Nye Tian's body was engulfed in flames, and the bone-eroding soul-shackling chain seemed to be merging with his body. QL11 The bone-eroding soul-shackling chain could not be removed or destroyed, so the only way was to transfer it. As long as Chiwu Yunxiu could endure the moment the bone-eroding soul-shackling chain was transferred, she would survive. However, to Nye Tian, enduring the bone-eroding soul-shackling chain was a huge risk. Would his current martial body be able to withstand the burden of the bone-eroding soul-shackling chain? Let's begin. Nye Tian immediately understood Fat Cat's intention and shouted. Chiwu Yunxiu could not hold on for much longer, so no matter what Fat Cat was going to do, he had to hurry. All right. Fat Cat nodded and appeared. He had no other choice but to transfer the curse. Nye Tian could not watch his mother die, so he would persevere until the end. If that was the case, the final result would be Nye Tian and Chiwu Yunxiu dying together. Transferring the curse, this was Nye Tian and Chiwu Yunxiu's last chance. Nye Tian, you have to hold on and stay conscious, Fat Cat said, sensed the soul-shackling chain and slowly absorbed the curse. Nye Tian nodded vigorously. Yeah. He had already made all the necessary preparations. Little Fat Cat didn't waste any more words. With a sway of its fat body, an endless amount of colored glass chi was released, enveloping Nye Tian. Ah! In the next moment, Nye Tian felt the bone-eroding soul-shackling chain penetrate into his body. The sudden, excruciating pain made him let out a miserable shriek. Nye Tian, what are you doing? Chiwu Yunxiu was stunned for a moment, then immediately reacted and shouted, No, I don't want you to bear the pain of the bone-eroding soul-shackling chain for me. But it was already too late. Under the stimulation of the azure chi, the cursed shackles had already begun to shift. This brat wants to transfer the cursed shackles to himself. On the other side, the 5 sub-bodies of the Dark Emperor reacted and cried out in alarm, their eyes trembling. They had never imagined that Nye Tian would be so crazy as to transfer the cursed shackles to himself. Lord Nye Tian, this. The 7 city lords were also stunned, and they were so shocked that they couldn't speak. Nye Tian's action was also out of their expectations. At that moment, the cursed shackles started to withdraw from Chiwu Yunxiu's body and slowly merged with Nye Tian's body. Nye Tian felt as if his entire body was about to be torn apart. Every bone in his body, every meridian, every drop of blood seemed to be on fire. The pain seeped into his bones, causing his facial features to contort. But he didn't make any sound and silently endured all the pain. Chiwu Yunxiu felt that the pain of the bone-eroding soul-shackling chain in her body was gradually weakening, but the pain in her heart was getting more and more intense. Stop him! At that moment, one of the sub-bodies shouted and stepped out, trying to stop Nye Tian from transferring the bone-eroding soul-shackling chain. Don't let anyone come near. Fat Cat suddenly looked at the 7 city lords and shouted. The 7 city lords reacted in unison and blocked the sub-body of the Dark Emperor. At that moment, the 5 sub-bodies of the Dark Emperor were all severely injured and were no match for the 7 city lords. Nye Tian wholeheartedly focused on transferring the curse shackles, not caring about anything else. At that moment, as the 9 bone-eroding soul-shackling chains were gradually removed, the flames around Chiwu Yunxiu's body gradually weakened, and her original appearance was revealed. Her body was trembling slightly, and the tears in her eyes were already flowing down her cheeks. The 9 bone-eroding soul-shackling chains gradually merged into Nie Tian's body, and on his body, 9 blood-colored wounds appeared. It was a ghastly sight. Nie Tian, you must hold on. Fat Cat felt that Nie Tian's aura was weakening, and her nerves were tense as she said in a deep voice. Nie Tian's body was burning with the scorching soul-shackling flame, and wounds kept appearing on his body. His entire body was already full of holes. Bang, 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 bang. On the other side, a series of muffled sounds rang out, and the 5 sub-bodies of the Dark Emperor exploded, dying on the spot. These 5 were already severely injured, and facing the 7 city lords, they were quickly killed. Qi Lan and the others stabilized themselves and looked at Nie Tian nervously. They also didn't know what would happen next. After a long time, the last sound was heard, and the 9 bone-eroding soul-shackling chains completely merged into Nie Tian's body. At this moment, Qiwu Yunxiu got rid of the pain that had been following her for a long time. However, the pain in her heart was even more intense. At this moment, she had returned to her original appearance, which was an extremely beautiful face. Her body was covered with a layer of glazed qi, but one could still vaguely see her perfect figure. Qiwu Yunxiu's aura was very weak, but it was very stable, and her life was no longer in danger. However, Nie Tian's situation was very bad. Even though his martial body was strong, the bone-eroding soul-shackling chains was beyond imagination, and it had caused a great impact on his martial body and soul. When Qiwu Yunxiu was suffering from the curse shackles, her strength was close to the peak of the immortal state, and she was much stronger than Nie Tian. Nie Tian. Qiwu Yunxiu moved to Nie Tian's side. Mother, I am fine. Nie Tian opened his eyes slightly, and the corners of his lips curled up into a smile. Then, he stretched out his hand, and a ball of white light surged out from his palm. It was the power of the earth vein source. Before Qiwu Yunxiu could react, Nie Tian had already transferred the power of the earth vein source into her body. This is the earth elemental power of origin. Qiwu Yunxiu was stunned, and her beautiful eyes trembled, and tears flowed down her cheeks again. Even under such circumstances, Nie Tian still cared about her, and transferred the power of life into her body. Mother, let's leave this place first. Nie Tian endured the pain of his body being torn apart, and said with a deep voice. He was still conscious, but the 9 bone-eroding soul-shackling chains were constantly battering his body, and he was constantly suffering from heart-wrenching pain. Qiwu Yunxiu nodded. Nie Tian did not say anything else. He flipped his palm, and a space ring appeared in his palm. Qiwu Yunxiu took out a piece of clothing from the ring, and put it on. The azure qi around her immediately dissipated. Nie Tian, I am too tired. I will go back first. Fat Cat said after seeing that everything had calmed down, and its figure disappeared. Fat Cat had used up a large amount of azure qi to transfer the curse shackles, and it urgently needed a rest. Mother, let's go. Nie Tian looked at Qiwu Yunxiu and nodded. He then moved and flew into the sky above the abyss. Boom! However, at this moment, a vast and powerful aura suddenly appeared in the sky. Like a landslide and a tsunami, it crashed down with a loud bang. Nie Tian suddenly felt an enormous pressure bearing down on him, causing his eyes to tremble involuntarily. Bang! In the next moment, before he could react, he was hit by the powerful aura, and his body was smashed into the ground like a giant rock. Nie Tian. Qiwu Yunxiu was taken aback by the sudden turn of events. Then, he let out a cry and reached out to grab Nie Tian. The two of them stopped just a few meters away from the lava lake. You can't leave. At that moment, a powerful voice rang out. Chapter 2440. In the air above the abyss, a black-clothed figure descended. His body surged with boundless darkness energy. The terrifying darkness energy was boundless, as if it could devour everything. It made one feel a strong sense of suppression. Dark Emperor. The 7 city lords were stunned for a few seconds before they finally spoke. Their expressions were extremely shocked. The face of the person in front of them was exactly the same as the 6 Dark Emperor subbodies. However, this person's aura was much stronger than the Dark Emperor's subbodies. Without a doubt, this person was the Dark Emperor himself. 7 city lords, why don't you kneel in front of me? The Dark Emperor said with a cold smile on his face. His eyes were filled with arrogance. We. The 7 city lords trembled in fear. Their backs were drenched in cold sweat, and their bodies trembled uncontrollably. Since you won't kneel, then die. The Dark Emperor didn't waste any time and spoke once more. He reached out with one hand and a darkness energy surged out, forming a ghostly claw in the air that grabbed at the 7 city lords. The 7 city lords were stunned. Just as they wanted to resist, they were shocked to find that countless black trees had appeared around them. Like tentacles, they wrapped around them and couldn't move at all. Boom! In the next moment, the ghostly claw descended. The Dark Emperor clenched his fist, and a terrifying power descended. The 7 city lords' bodies shrank as if they were about to be squeezed to death. The Dark Emperor was simply too strong. The 7 city lords were completely powerless in front of him. The 7 city lords' bodies were squeezed together, and they were about to be squeezed to death. Stop! Just at that moment, a low roar sounded out. A figure covered in flames appeared. It was Nyetian. QL 11-inch godly demon origin embryo kid. The Dark Emperor's eyes darkened and locked onto Nyetian cold. Dark Emperor! Nyetianling replied coldly. His body trembled and all the power in his body surged. He said in a low voice, "The person you want is me. Let them go." Sure. The corner of the Dark Emperor's mouth twitched. With a wave of his hand, the 7 city lords were sent flying and smashed into the lava cliff. It was unknown if they were dead or alive. The Dark Emperor looked at Nyetian coldly and said with a playful expression, "Brat, you have truly amazed this emperor. I really didn't expect that all 6 of my subbodies would die at your hands. If I hadn't come here personally, I'm afraid I would have let you escape." Run? Nyetianling laughed. His eyes were as fierce as a wolf's as he said coldly, "Would I run before I kill you?" It was all thanks to the Dark Emperor that Chiwu Yunxiu had endured so much pain. Nyetian vowed to kill the Dark Emperor. Kill me? The Dark Emperor sneered, as if he had heard the funniest joke. He looked at Nyetian with disdain, and said with a high and mighty attitude, "With just you?" Right now, the Dark Sovereign's aura was comparable to the peak martial artists of the 9 realms. Nyetian, on the other hand, was only a mid-stage paramount god. The gap between the two of them was like the distance between heaven and earth. It would be as difficult as scaling the heavens for Nyetian to kill the Dark Emperor. However, Nyetian's eyes were filled with determination as he replied, "With just me." Humph, humph, humph. Suddenly, the Dark Emperor laughed. His laughter was filled with contempt and ridicule. He had no idea where a mid-stage paramount god could get such confidence from. "Brat, you just absorbed the bone-eroding soul-shackling chains," the Dark Emperor said coldly. "You won't even be able to survive, much less kill me. Let's see how you plan to kill me." The Dark Emperor's eyes flickered with a cold light. "By the way, do you know who this emperor is?" Nyetian's eyes narrowed, and a look of confusion flickered across his face. "I don't care who you are. You're going to die today." "You sure talk big, kid," the Dark Emperor sneered. The Dark Emperor sneered and said solemnly, "Even the ancestors of the Nye family and the Chi Wu family would not dare to say such words. You should ask your mother who this emperor is." Nyetian frowned and his face fell. When the Dark Emperor mentioned the ancestor of the Nye family and the ancestor of the Qi family, he seemed to be from the same era as the latter two. Just who was the Dark Emperor? "Yuli, if you want more power, I can give you the extreme demon embryo, but please let Nyetian go." Just as Nyetian was surprised, Chi Wu's figure appeared. She stared at the Dark Emperor with her beautiful eyes and said in a deep voice, "Yu Li." Nie Tian's eyes widened when he heard the name. The first thing he thought of was the Yu clan, one of the 9 great clans of Genesis. The fact that the Dark Emperor could fuse with the origin power of wood meant that he was most likely from one of the 9 great clans. The fact that he mentioned the ancestors of the Nie clan and the Chiwu clan meant that he was acquainted with them. With that in mind, the identity of the Dark Emperor was very clear. He was the ancestor of the Yu clan. Nie Tian was right. The Dark Emperor's real name was Yu Li, and he was the ancestor of the Yu clan, one of the 9 great clans of Genesis. Nie Tian's face fell when he thought of this. He was surprised that the ancestor of the Yu clan was still alive and appeared in the dark prison as the Dark Emperor. Extreme demon embryo? Yu Li sneered. He glanced at Chiwu Yunxiu and looked at Nie Tian. There's a godfiend embryo here. Why would I be interested in the extreme demon embryo? Yu Li knew that the godfiend embryo was much more powerful than the extreme demon embryo. Since he could get the godfiend embryo, why would he be interested in the extreme demon embryo? Yu Li, you hate the Chiwu clan. Why did you attack Nie Tian? Chiwu Yunxiu frowned and said coldly. He's your son. Doesn't the Chiwu clan's blood flow in his body? Yu Li smiled Chiwu Yunxiu and said, Chiwu Yunxiu, you should know that I tortured you because you're from the Chiwu clan. I have an irreconcilable feud with Chi Wuxiong. Since he's dead, I can only blame it on his descendant. So today, you and your son will die here. Chi Wuxiong was the name of the Chiwu clan's ancestor. Yu Li and Chi Wuxiong had a deep feud. That's why he tortured Chiwu Yunxiu. You tortured my mother because you have a feud with the Chiwu clan's ancestor? Nie Tian's eyes darkened and his expression was murderous. That's right. Yu Li smiled coldly and said in a deep voice, Actually, Chiwu Yunxiu can be considered lucky. This emperor only imprisoned her, let her suffer a little, and let her live. The Chi Sha you saw earlier was the most miserable person I've ever killed. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He didn't know what kind of feud Yu Li had with Chi Sha. Kid, you're here to save Chi Sha, right? Yu Li smiled and said, Then you should know that Chi Sha is from the ancient Ming tribe. So what if I know? Nie Tianling replied coldly. Aren't you curious why I became the Dark Emperor of the Dark Ocean? Yu Li smiled again and asked in a deep voice. If you have something to say, just say it. Nie Tian calmed down a lot. He was curious to hear what Yu Li had to say. Chapter 2441. Nie Tian was taken aback when he heard Yu Li's words. He didn't expect that Yu Li, the strongest and most powerful person in the Dark Sea prison, was actually a prisoner of the Dark Sea prison. He also didn't expect that the person who imprisoned Yu Li was the Netherworld Emperor. What had happened between the Netherworld Emperor and Yu Li? No wonder Yu Li had tortured Chi Sha, robbed him of his eyes, used the scaled demon evil art to turn him into a scaled demon, and even controlled his consciousness to turn him into a killing machine. All of this was because of the Netherworld Emperor. Nie Tian had heard a little about the ancient Ming race's invasion of the 9 realms. However, he didn't know the specifics. Young man, are you curious? Yu Li looked at Nie Tian and laughed. Since you are about to die, I might as well tell you a few things. Yu Li began to recount the events of the distant past. When the ancient Ming race invaded the 9 realms, they were unstoppable and unstoppable. The first place that the Netherworld Emperor conquered wasn't the 9 realms, but the Dark Sea Prison. The Dark Sea Prison was located between the 9 realms. At that time, there were 9 spacetime gates in the prison that led to the 9 realms. Therefore, the Netherworld Emperor used the Dark Sea Prison as a base to conquer the 9 realms. It didn't take long before the Netherworld Emperor led the ancient Ming army to conquer 8 realms. The 9 great clans had no choice but to form an alliance. The leader of the alliance was the Qi family's ancestor, Chi Wuxiong. Chi Wuxiong didn't want to fight the Netherworld Emperor head-on. He wanted to sue for peace. He sent a messenger to the Dark Sea Black Prison to seek peace, and this messenger was Yuli. Yuli and the Netherworld Emperor were about to reach an agreement. The Netherworld Emperor would leave one realm and not invade. However, news came from the 9 realms that the 9 Great Clans Alliance and the ancient Ming race had started a war. The ancient Ming race had suffered heavy losses. The Netherworld Emperor was enraged by this news. He imprisoned Yuli and left 9 bone-eroding soul shackling chains on him. He also set up a sky-punishing restriction in his body so that he would never be able to step out of the Dark Emperor's Great Hall. Then, the Netherworld Emperor led an army to invade the last realm. However, he never returned. After that, news of the Netherworld Emperor's death spread, and the ancient Ming were expelled from the 9 realms. But Yuli was forever imprisoned in the Dark Sea Black Prison. Therefore, he hated Qi Wuxiong for betraying him. He hated the Underworld Emperor even more, because the latter made him suffer unimaginable pain. Later on, after Yuli adapted to the bone-eroding soul shackling chains, he slowly became the Dark Monarch and turned the Dark Sea Prison into a prison shared by all 9 realms. However, no one knew that the greatest prisoner of the Dark Sea Black Prison was none other than Yuli himself. Yuli very rarely left the Dark Emperor Hall because he was under the control of the heaven-punishing restriction that the Netherworld Emperor had set up. As soon as he left the Dark Emperor Hall, the heaven-punishing restriction within his body would activate, making him wish he was dead. He was actually risking his life by coming here. So, the bone-eroding soul shackling chain is something on you. Nie Tian's eyes flickered with murderous intent after hearing Yuli's words. He said in a deep voice, "And you actually transferred the bone-eroding soul shackling chain to my mother." The bone-eroding soul shackling chain is a curse that the Netherworld Emperor used to imprison my strength. Yuli smiled coldly and said, "I've always wanted to transfer the bone-eroding soul shackling chain. Unfortunately, the bone-eroding soul shackling chain will only accept a martial physique with a stronger bloodline than its previous host. I have the myriad wood divine physique, so my bloodline is very strong. That's why I haven't found a suitable candidate. The 7 murders demon physique repels the bone-eroding soul shackling chain, so it can't be transferred. Your mother has the extreme demon fetus, so her bloodline is even stronger. She is the best candidate to transfer the bone-eroding soul shackling chain. If it wasn't for the fact that I needed to transfer the bone-eroding soul shackling chain, I would have taken your mother's extreme demon fetus. I originally thought it was a pity that such a good extreme demon fetus was destroyed by the bone-eroding soul shackling chain. But I didn't expect you to show up. The God-fiend origin embryo is much stronger than the extreme demon fetus." Yuli couldn't help but chuckle coldly. As far as he was concerned, Nie Tian was already a meal on his plate. "So that's how it is." Nie Tian frowned slightly. No wonder he had a feeling that the bone-eroding soul shackling chain had taken the initiative to merge with his martial body when he had transferred it. Apparently, the bone-eroding soul shackling chain was more powerful than the extreme demon fetus. Thankfully, Nie Tian's godfiend origin embryo was stronger than the extreme demon fetus. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to transfer the bone-eroding soul shackling chain. Humph. Yuli chuckled coldly, glaring at Nie Tian. "You know everything you need to know, boy. Even if you die now, you'll be able to rest in peace." "Die?" Nie Tianling chuckled coldly. "We haven't even fought yet. Are you really that confident that you can kill me? Young man, you sure are arrogant." Chuckling coldly, Yuli's energy surged as he said, "I'm very curious to see how a measly mid-paramount god like you is going to fight me." His berserk voice was filled with arrogance and condescension. Even though Nie Tian had killed many of the Dark Emperor's subbodies, Yuli still didn't take him seriously. Yuli was a peak expert from the ancient times, and his strength had once been close to that of a half-saint. Even in the Dark Emperor Hall, with the heaven-punishing restriction suppressing his strength, he still had the battle prowess of a peak god. How could Nye Tian fight him? Mother! Sensing Yuli's energy, Nye Tian couldn't stop himself from backing up. He turned to Qi Wu Yunxiu and nodded. Nye Tian, you. Qi Wu Yunxiu's beautiful eyes flickered, and her pretty face was filled with shock. She knew what Nye Tian was trying to do. He wanted her to activate the sealing power and awaken the power of 9,000 fiend gods in her god-devil nascent embryo. But now, Nye Tian's martial body was almost at its limit. If she activated the sealing power now, Nye Tian's martial body wouldn't be able to handle it. Mother, trust me. Nye Tian knew that Qi Wu Yunxiu was worried about him, so his eyes shone with domineering confidence. Activating the sealing power and awakening the 9,000 fiend gods was Nye Tian's only chance. Otherwise, he wouldn't stand a chance against Yuli. Have you mother and son finished discussing? Yuli laughed coldly. His arrogance was at its peak as he said madly, "This emperor is going to make his move." With that, Yuli's body flickered, and he slammed his palm down, causing the void to tremble. Boom! Then, an eerie blackwood ghost claw appeared. Like a curtain that covered the sky, it slammed down on Nye Tian. The blackwood ghost claw's aura was forceful and sharp, as if it could destroy everything. QL11 If this palm landed, even a peak immortal state powerhouse would be heavily injured. Mother! At the critical moment, Nye Tian growled, his eyes trembling. With his current strength, there was only one outcome for him to face such a terrifying palm head-on, death. Qi Wu Yunxiu's eyes flickered, she was still hesitating. She knew that with Nye Tian's current physical condition, he couldn't withstand the impact of the sealing power. Actually, Nye Tian had temporarily awakened the power of 9,000 fiend gods in the past few times, and it was a huge burden on his martial body. Qi Wu Yunxiu didn't know what would happen to Nye Tian if she activated the sealing power again. But now, if she didn't activate the sealing power, Nye Tian would be killed by Yuli. Between a rock and a hard place, he would die if he advanced or retreated. Chapter 2442. In an instant, Qi Wu Yunxiu's brain spun rapidly. Given the current situation, it seemed that no matter what she chose, Nye Tian would not be able to live. In the next instant, she felt the surging energy in the air. Her beautiful eyes flickered as a strange light flickered in them. At this moment, Nye Tian felt the fiend god energy in his body exploding madly, condensing into a fiend god armor around his body. Rumble! At the same time, the sharp claws of the blackwood tree slammed down, slamming into the fiend god armor. Nye Tian's body swayed as he was sent flying. But when he was still in midair, a pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back. After the wings spread out, he abruptly steadied his body. Huh! Yuli couldn't help but exclaim in surprise when he saw the scene in front of him. But he soon understood. He coldly laughed and said, "So this is the power of the fiend god origin embryo. The forbidden fiend god energy in the legends is indeed powerful." Nye Tian's body stiffened as a trace of blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. After the awakening of 9,000 fiend god energy, he felt as though his entire body was about to explode. But the 9 bone-eroding soul-refining seals around his body made him feel as though his body was about to explode. If it wasn't for the support of the astral energy, his body would have already exploded into a pool of blood under the violent impact of the fiend god energy. "Mother, are you all right?" Nye Tian stabilized his body and looked at Qi Wu Yunxiu as he asked anxiously. Qi Wu Yunxiu's aura had already stabilized after the bone-eroding soul-refining chains were extracted from her body, and she had also received the energy from Nye Tian's Terra vein source. But now, she had once again activated the sealing energy and suffered a backlash. Blood dripped from the corner of her mouth as her aura became unstable once again. I'm fine." But she forced herself to hold on and waved her hands. "Mother, hang in there. I'll finish this fellow soon." Nye Tian nodded his head as his gaze turned cold, locking onto Yuli. "Brat." Yuli's eyes flickered, as if sensing something from Nie Tion's body. He said solemnly, "I didn't expect your martial body to be able to withstand the power of the fiend god and the bone-eroding soul-shackling chains at the same time. Looks like there's something even more terrifying in your body." As a powerful cultivator, how could he not tell that Qi Wu Yunxiu was helping Nie Tian forcibly awaken his godfiend power? Otherwise, there was no way Nie Tian's strength could be so abnormal. Nie Tian's martial body was so strong that it surpassed that of a peak paramount god. The power of 9 bone-eroding soul-shackling chains, in addition to the violent power of 9,000 gods and demons, was still able to withstand it. It was simply abnormal. Yuli sensed that there was an incomparably mysterious power within Nie Tian's body. It surged around his body and fused with his martial body. It was this power that provided infinite possibilities for Nie Tian's martial body. However, the aura of this power was very strange, and Yuli had never seen it before. It seemed to be some kind of higher-level power. "Brat, I don't care what's inside of you. Once I kill you, everything you have will be mine." Yuli sneered inwardly. "You can't withstand the wrath of the fiend god." At that moment, Nie Tian's energy surged, and the power of the fiend god and demons surged out in a terrifying manner. At the same time, he was surrounded by a surging sword will. The fusion of the sword will and the fiend god's power made Nie Tian's fiend god sword will stronger than ever. Yuli could sense Nie Tian's sword will, and he couldn't help but frown in surprise. What a strong sword will! He hadn't expected Nie Tian's sword will to be so powerful. Nie Tian hovered in the air, the sword will around him so sharp that it seemed like it could tear space itself apart. "Human sword slashes the stars." The next moment, he roared, and his figure suddenly moved. Like a graceful swan, he struck out with his sword. Boom! The sword shadow whistled, and it was nearly 10,000 meters long. It was like a huge mountain, and it attacked Yuli. The surrounding space suddenly shook, as if it was about to collapse. Yuli's eyes narrowed. Obviously, he had underestimated Nie Tian's strength. However, he didn't panic. His body shook slightly, and suddenly 8 pieces of black wood appeared, like 8 black dragons. They rose up and turned into a shield in front of him. Bang! 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 In the next moment, the sword shadow fell and bombarded the 8 pieces of black wood. A series of booming sounds were heard, and the black wood broke into pieces, turning into sawdust. However, the fiend god's sword shadow's momentum slowly weakened under the impact of the black wood. Bang! Finally, when the sword shadow hit the 7th piece of black wood, it collapsed. Nie Tian's full-strength attack still couldn't break through Yuli's defense. Yuli's figure was forced back 100 meters before he steadied himself. He wasn't injured, but his eyes were full of surprise. Then, he calmed down and said in a low voice, "I really didn't expect that you could break through 7 of my defenses in front of my 8 desolate black wood. I have to say, you've amazed me." Nie Tian steadied himself, and his eyes surged with determination. Yuli's strength was beyond his expectations. This guy was still being suppressed by the Heaven Punishing Seal, but his battle strength was actually slightly stronger than Ye Dao, Tian Kuei, and the others. He really didn't know how strong this guy would be if the Heaven Punishing Seal was removed. Nie Tian speculated that Yuli's peak state was at least a half-step saint expert. In fact, this wasn't strange. Strictly speaking, Yuli wasn't from the 9 major realms. The ancestors of the 9 great families of creation had come to the 9 major realms on the orders of the Juying Temple to find the 9 great origins. Therefore, the 9 ancestors should be people of the abandoned land, so it was normal for them to have the strength of a half-step saint. "Kid, that strike just now was probably your strongest strike." Then, Yuli smiled coldly, and the corners of his mouth curled into a cold curve. "Next, it's my turn to attack." As his cold voice fell, Yuli's aura surged, and waves of violent power surged. 8 desolate black wood once again appeared around his body. The 8 slabs of black wood coiled around him like 8 giant snakes. 8 desolate black wood, 8 desolate extermination. In the next moment, Yuli let out a low roar. His body suddenly shook, and 8 black trees swiftly shot out. They were like primordial barbaric beasts galloping, and they gave off a murderous aura as they surged towards Nyetian. Nyetian's eyes couldn't help but tremble when he felt the 8 waves of destructive power coming at him. In an instant, he reacted. The demon god's power in his body was released, and the demon god's armor formed around his body. Bang! The moment the demon god's armor formed, the first piece of black wood fell and heavily bombarded the demon god's armor, but it directly shattered. Bang! Then, the second piece of black wood also shattered. Bang! The third piece of black wood shattered again. Bang! The fourth piece of black wood shattered as well. Bang! Crack! The fifth piece of black wood shattered as well, but it left a glaring crack on the demon god's armor. Bang! Crack, crack, crack! The sixth piece of black wood fell, and the crack on the demon god's armor instantly widened. Bang! Boom! The seventh piece of black wood fell, and the demon god's armor could no longer withstand it. It suddenly exploded, turning into a vast expanse of demon god chi that dissipated into the air. Bang! In the next moment, the 8th piece of black wood fell and heavily smashed onto Nyetian's body. Chapter 2443. Nyetian. The tragic scene made Chiwu Yunxiu cry out in shock, her beautiful eyes trembling incessantly. She suddenly sensed that Nyetian's aura became extremely weak, as if it would disappear at any time. It's already very impressive that he can block this emperor's 7 slabs of black wood. Yuli's figure stood in the air as he said coldly, if the 8th slab of black wood hits his martial body head-on, he will undoubtedly die. Hearing Yuli's words, Chiwu Yunxiu's beautiful eyes suddenly shrunk, tears gushed out of her eyes, and blood flowed out of the corner of her mouth. Really? But right at this moment, a voice sounded, appearing incomparably mocking. Boom! Within the lava cliff, an explosion sounded. A blood-colored figure walked out. It was Nyetian. At this moment, Nyetian's entire body was covered in blood, and his flesh was badly mangled. But he was still alive, and the sharpness and determination in his eyes did not change in the slightest. Yuli, your 8 desolate black wood is still not strong enough. It can't kill me. Nyetian's body shook, and the blood on his body was cleansed, revealing a pale face. But there was not the slightest bit of fear in his eyes. Instead, it was blazing with fighting spirit. This. Yuli looked at Nyetian, his eyes trembling incessantly. His expression was blank for a moment before he said, "How is this possible?" He completely did not expect that Nyetian could actually survive after taking the 8 desolate black wood head-on. And at this moment, not only did Nyetian's aura not weaken, but it became even stronger. In Yuli's view, this was something completely impossible. That attack just now, even a peak deity state martial artist would also be heavily injured. But not only did Nyetian not die, but his aura skyrocketed instead. This completely did not make sense. Kid, what exactly is inside your martial body? Yuli calmed down, his eyes trembling as he asked. There is something that you will never be able to obtain. Nyetianling sneered. He took a step forward and the fiend god energy in his body exploded. His aura was like that of a fiend god descending to the mortal world, crushing everything in its path. At this moment, Nyetian did not know why, but he felt that he could completely control the power of 9,000 demons and gods. Moreover, he could feel that the god-fiend power was much more violent than before. Every strand of god-fiend power seemed to have been sublimated, and its might increased by several times. At this moment, a thin god-fiend barrier surged around Nyetian. This god-fiend barrier looked thin, but it was actually extremely terrifying. This is impossible, absolutely impossible. Sensing Nyetian's aura, Yuli's eyes trembled as he exclaimed, "How did your aura suddenly become stronger?" Prepare to die. Nie Tianling sneered, his eyes filled with murderous intent. He didn't know why his aura suddenly became stronger. Immediately after, he took a step forward, and the fiend god armor once again appeared around his body. He directly punched out. In an instant, the giant shadow of a fist, like a mountain, smashed towards Yuli. Yuli's eyes widened as he reacted. With a flip of his palm, a desolate black wood appeared and blocked before him. Bang! Immediately, the desolate black wood, under the attack of the fiend god's fist, crumbled. Yuli's voice was sent flying. The corner of Nie Tian's lips twitched. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. Before Yuli could stabilize himself, he threw another punch. Bang! Amidst the muffled sound, Yuli's silhouette once again flew out and smashed into the lava wall. After Nie Tian's capabilities increased, Yuli was unable to withstand a single attack and was completely abused by him. Get out! Immediately after, Nie Tian looked at the cave above the lava cliff and sneered. He stretched out his hand, and the shadow of a fiend god's palm appeared. An enormous suction force appeared and directly pulled Yuli out. Ancestor of the Yu clan? The Dark Emperor? I will tear you apart alive today. Nie Tian's eyes were filled with murderous intent. His cold voice resounded and he directly punched out. Bang! 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 Amidst the muffled sounds, Yuli's silhouette swayed left and right. He was beaten so badly that he did not even look like a human. The dignified ancestor of the Yu clan, the high and mighty Dark Emperor of the Dark Prison, was actually beaten up like this. This was something that Yuli would never have dreamt of. The aura around Nie Tian's body surged crazily. His entire person was cold and murderous, extremely terrifying. When Chiwu Yunxiu saw this scene, she seemed to have realized something and her eyes trembled uncontrollably. The thing that she was most worried about had finally happened. The seal in Nie Tian's body had gone out of control. The reason why Nie Tian's current strength could skyrocket was because of the sealed spacetime. A huge amount of energy surged out and stimulated the potential of his divine demon powers. Under the sealed spacetime, Nie Tian's strength would indeed skyrocket. However, his martial body would not be able to withstand such power. What should I do? Chiwu Yunxiu's beautiful eyes trembled, and she looked extremely nervous. Although she could control the seal in Nie Tian's body, she did not understand the seal at all. She also did not know what would happen next. Don't hit me anymore. At this moment, Yuli's trembling voice begged for mercy. Yes, I want to beat you until you beg for mercy. I like to hear your voice begging for mercy. Nie Tian's eyes were cold and his expression was ruthless. He laughed maniacally. But I will not let you go. After he finished speaking, he suddenly raised his arm and gathered all the divine demon powers in his body and punched down. Bang! The moment the terrifying shadow of the fist landed, a muffled sound was heard. Yuli's body flew out like a sharp arrow and smashed into the lava cliff. Kaboom! With a loud bang, the entire abyss shook and a huge cave with a diameter of 100 meters appeared on the cliff. Yuli's body was at the center of the cave. He was like a pile of mud, his flesh and blood were a mess. Nie Tian's punch almost destroyed the entire abyss. Not dead yet. Nie Tian's body froze and his eyes locked onto Yuli. He could not help but sneer. He sensed that although Yuli's breath was very weak, it did not disappear and was very stable. Yuli's 1,000-wood divine body was indeed strong. After being tortured by Nie Tian for such a long time, he was still alive. Nie Tian. At this moment Yuli's figure suddenly moved. He let out a low roar and directly stood up. Do you still have the ability to resist? Nie Tianling looked at Yuli coldly and said in a low voice. Nie Tian, you forced me to do this. Yuli's face was twisted and hideous as he spoke in a low voice. On his forehead, a blood-red vortex appeared and terrifying power surged within it. Nie Tian felt a strange aura and could not help but frown. It seemed that Yuli still had a powerful trump card that he had not used. If you want to kill me, then I will die with you. Yuli's expression was hideous and terrifying. The blood-red vortex on his forehead flew out and surged in the air. Then it began to expand. Suddenly, the air was filled with an extremely strong bloody aura. The bloody aura was suffocating. Nye Tian frowned and looked confused. Qul 11-inch. Oh no, this guy has forcefully broken the restriction in his body. At this moment the fat cat screamed. His voice was filled with panic. At this moment, Yuli wanted to fight to the death. He forcefully broke the heaven-punishing restriction that the Emperor of the Underworld left in his body and restored his strength to the peak. He wanted to fight to the death with Nye Tian. If he forcefully broke the restriction, Yuli would definitely die. Chapter 2444. Break the forbidding formation? Nye Tian was startled when he heard Fat Cat's words. He had heard from Yuli that the latter's body had a heaven-punishing formation left by the Emperor of the Underworld, which prevented him from leaving the Dark Emperor Hall. He did not expect Yuli's final trump card to be to break the heaven-punishing formation forcefully. Bang! 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 Just at this moment, the aura around Yuli's body suddenly soared. Waves of wild energy surged through the air, causing the space to tremble unceasingly. **T. Nye Tian frowned and exclaimed in his heart. He could sense that Yuli's aura had reached the peak of the transcendent state, and was approaching the half-martial sacred realm. Yuli's strength was already at the half-martial sacred realm, but he was suppressed by the heaven-punishing formation, which was why his strength was only at the peak of the immortal state. Now that he had broken through the heaven-punishing formation forcefully, his strength was not affected by the forbidding formation, which was why he had reached the half-martial sacred realm. Hide! Nye Tian immediately reacted and came to Chiwu Yunxio's side. He opened the 9 extremities and let her in. Nye Tian, you. Chiwu Yunxio could sense that the forbidding formation in Nye Tian's body was getting stronger. Her eyes flickered and she wanted to say something. Mother, I'm fine. Before she could finish, she was interrupted by Nye Tian, who pushed her into the 9 extremities. Nye Tian had no idea that the forbidding formation in his body was slowly losing control. He thought it was Chiwu Yunxio's control that made his force of fiend god stronger. Nye Tian was relieved after letting Chiwu Yunxio enter the 9 extremities. Following this, he fixed his gaze on a cave on the cliff and reached out his hand, unleashing a strong suction force to pull the 7 city lords out of the cave. The 7 city lords were severely injured, but their auras were still present. Nye Tian did not say anything and let the 7 city lords into the 9 extremities. Having taken care of all of this, Nye Tian let out a long breath of turbid qi. Next, he could fight Yuli in peace. At this moment, Yuli had completely broken through the heaven-punishing prohibition. His aura skyrocketed to the extreme. Streams of black aura surged around him, making him look extremely strange. Stinking brat, you've forced this emperor into a dead end. This emperor will never allow you to leave this place alive. Yuli let out a furious roar. His figure moved directly and his palm slammed downwards. An 8 black wood appeared in the air and smashed towards Nye Tian like a huge black sword. The mighty aura was incomparably vigorous, as if it had the power to destroy everything in its path. The fiend god power around Nye Tian's body surged violently, and the fiend god armor actually doubled in size in an instant. He punched out violently. Boom! 2 extremely violent forces collided in the air, causing the space to suddenly stagnate. A shock wave visible to the naked eye appeared, like a violent ripple, bombarding in all directions. Boom! Crack, crack, crack! The terrifying shock wave fell, and the entire abyss shook violently. A huge crack appeared, and the abyss sank a few inches, as if it was about to collapse. Bang! In the next moment, the 8 black wood and the fiend god fist shadow almost exploded at the same time. Endless violent forces rushed out, wreaking havoc in the space. Boom! The cliff of the abyss was hit and exploded. In an instant, rocks flew everywhere, and turbid waves rose to the sky. The entire abyss could no longer withstand the terrifying violent forces, and suddenly collapsed. Nietion's figure moved. His body trembled slightly, and a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Immediately, he saw a 1,000-meter large boulder falling down. His eyes trembled, and astral soul wings appeared on his back. His figure suddenly moved to the side, and then with a flap of his wings, he shot straight up into the sky. Yuli's figure also shot up into the sky at this moment. His body was surrounded by huge black wood, and the surrounding boulders collapsed. The two figures were extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, they rushed out of the abyss. Rumble! Under their feet, the entire abyss suddenly collapsed, forming a huge pit, and turbid waves thousands of meters high rushed up. Boy, your strength has amazed me. Yuli's figure froze in the air, and he looked at Nietion cold, and said in a cold voice, "I'm tired of hearing this sentence." Tianling responded with a smile. His face remained calm, but his eyes were filled with strong killing intent. But in his heart, he was very surprised. He was very curious why he suddenly vomited blood just now. He clearly didn't suffer too much of an impact, and his body showed no signs of weakness. Instead, his strength was overflowing and he almost exploded. He didn't understand why he vomited blood just now. What was going on? Nietion, do you feel anything? At this moment, Fat Cat's voice sounded, and she seemed to be a little nervous. Nietion frowned slightly. He used his divine sense to sense his body, and couldn't help but have a strange expression. He faintly felt that there was a huge and boundless power in the fiend god original embryo, and it was slowly awakening, like a ferocious beast that was waking up from a deep sleep. This power is so strong. Nietion became cold, and he couldn't help but say nervously. He could clearly feel that the fiend god ocean was becoming more and more violent, as if the endless ocean was about to explode into a tsunami. QL11, and at the bottom of the fiend god ocean, there seemed to be a huge monster that was slowly waking up. Nietion had never felt such majestic power before. Even the pseudo-sage expert that he encountered previously didn't have such a terrifying aura. What's going on? Nietion forced himself to calm down, but his lips were trembling, and he asked with a trembling voice. Fat Cat's expression was a little sluggish, and she said in a shocked tone, "Nietion, the seal in your body seems to be completely opened." "What do you mean?" Nietion was stunned, and he asked in shock. "Nietion, the seal in your body is very powerful. Once it is opened, your martial body won't be able to withstand it, and you will be directly crushed by the power of the seal." Fat Cat didn't explain too much, and instead, she exclaimed in shock. "This..." Nietion's eyes trembled, and he couldn't help but gasp. At this moment, he suddenly understood something. No wonder his body was originally close to its limit, but after Chiwu Yunxiu activated the seal, his power skyrocketed, and it was even more terrifying than before. And now, his power was still skyrocketing, and the dark aura around his body was getting stronger and stronger. He couldn't suppress it at all, and it was almost out of his control. It turned out that the seal in his body was about to be opened. He couldn't imagine how powerful the seal was, and why it was so terrifying. That kind of power was completely unimaginable to him. "Kid, are you afraid?" Yuli saw the change in Nietion's expression, and he seemed to be very frightened, and he couldn't help but sneer, and said arrogantly, "Unfortunately, it's too late." As soon as he said that, Yuli's figure moved instantly, and 8 black wood appeared around him. They whistled out, and like 8 giant beasts, they madly attacked Nietion. He forced his way through the seal, knowing that he would definitely die. Before he died, of course, he had to drag someone down with him. Moreover, in his heart, there was still a glimmer of hope. As long as he could kill Nyetian, and successfully merge with the latter's celestial demon embryo, there might be a chance that he could survive. You're courting death. Nyetian felt the enormous power rolling towards him, but he growled, and Starlight Heaven Slash appeared in his hand. His entire body's sword will was released, and it perfectly merged with the celestial demon force, forming a boundless celestial demon sword will. Chapter 2445. Boom! Boom! The 8 barren black wood shot up to the sky and the fiend's celestial sword shadow whizzed. The air within a radius of tens of thousands of meters trembled. The space was pulled taut as if it was about to collapse. QL11 Yu Li and Nyetian's strength was so terrifying that it could shake heaven and earth. Boom! The next moment, the 8 barren black wood and the fiend's celestial sword shadow collided with each other. An explosion was heard in the sky. Chi chi chi. In an instant, waves of wild power surged in the space. It was extremely violent and ear-piercing sounds were heard in the air. This was a battle between two forces. They consumed each other and devoured each other. The two forces were too terrifying. They couldn't destroy each other in an instant. They were in a stalemate. Boom! Crack! 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 Then, the violent power spread to the ground, and the earth within a radius of tens of thousands of meters was instantly lifted up. Rocks cracked, grass and trees were all crushed, and the earth was torn apart, leaving terrifying cracks on the ground. This scene was really earth-shattering. It was like the end of the world. Yu Li and Nyetian stood in the sky like two mountains. Their bodies were surging with terrifying wild power as they fought against each other crazily. The two's power was in a stalemate for more than 10 seconds. Finally, someone couldn't take it anymore. Boom! After a loud explosion, the 8 barren black wood shook violently. It could no longer withstand the violent pressure of the sword essence. Boom! 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 Immediately after, a deep and terrifying explosion sound came from high up in the sky. The 8 barren black wood instantly collapsed and turned into wood chips flying in the air. The black wood chips danced in the air, and the surrounding space became much darker. Hum! The next moment, the fiend's celestial sword Shadow's power rose to the limit. It let out a piercing sword cry that shook the surroundings and the space. Oh no! Yu Li felt an extremely sharp sword pressure in an instant. His eyes couldn't help but tremble and he screamed in horror. He wanted to fight back, but it was too late. Boom! Bang! In the next moment, the sword shadows surged and pressed down. A muffled bang resounded, and Yu Li's figure flew backward, leaving behind a bloody trail in the air. On the other hand, Nyetian's figure was as unmoving as a mountain. Furthermore, his aura was still rising rapidly. However, blood continued to flow from the corner of his mouth. The 9 scars on his body became even more obvious, as if his entire body was about to be torn apart. The power of this seal is so terrifying. Nyetian felt excruciating pain all over his body. A crazy force was tearing him apart, almost tearing him into pieces. Oh no! Fat Cat could feel the power of the seal getting stronger and stronger. Her expression couldn't help but tremble, and her heart cried out in alarm. However, at this moment, Yu Li stood up again. His entire body was dripping with fresh blood, and he had already become a bloody person. However, the aura around his body continued to rise explosively. This guy, he's not dead? Nyetian's eyes darkened, and the corner of his mouth twitched. He diverted a lot of his energy to forcefully suppress the seal in his body, but it was useless. The terrifying seal was like a wild beast trapped in a cage. Now that it had found a chance to escape, how could it give up? Bang! 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 At this moment, bloody wounds began to appear all over Nyetian's body. Then, flaming chains appeared and danced around his body like wild snakes. Bone-eroding soul shackling chains. Nyetian's expression suddenly changed, and he was extremely shocked. The bone-eroding soul shackling chains in his body seemed to be unable to withstand the violent power of the seal, and directly came out. 9 bone-eroding soul shackling chains coiled around Nietian's body, making him look extremely strange, like a 9-clawed octopus. "Kid, how can you be so strong?" Yuli spoke at this moment. His voice was extremely cold, and his entire body began to tear apart. Hua, hua, hua. Then, Yuli's body was forcefully torn apart, and many black trees grew out. His entire body was like a seed, growing crazily and instantly expanding. The black trees spread in the air, and they were extremely violent. This scene was very strange, but to Nietian it was not strange. When he fought with Li Qi before, Li Qi's body had once grown into a huge black tree. Hua, hua, hua. At this moment, Yuli's body had turned into a huge black tree, which was at least 10,000 meters long. The huge branches were like black giant snakes, dancing in the void, and a terrifying aura was generated. The black tree that Yuli had formed was much stronger than Li Qi, and its aura was shocking, as if it could devour the sky. "Boy, even if I die, I will take you down with me." Yuli let out a furious roar. The huge black wood body suddenly moved. Countless huge branches came crashing down like a huge dark cloud, covering the sky and the sun, rolling and whistling. Boom! In the sky, countless black trees were like hemp ropes, twisting together to form a terrifying black tree hand, pressing down with a loud bang. Buzz! The void suddenly tightened, and the spiraling space was forcefully torn apart, emitting a terrifying squeezing sound. At this moment, Nietian felt a terrifying pressure, and his eyes trembled. Boom! 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 But then, the power of the divine and demon in his body suddenly skyrocketed. The power of the divine and demon was like a raging wave, stirring up a terrifying aura. "You want to die with me? You are not worthy." In an instant, Nietian's eyes turned cold, and the corner of his mouth twitched. The 9 bone-eroding soul shackling chains around his body actually danced wildly, entangling with each other violently. Nietian was stunned. He actually felt that the bone-eroding soul shackling chains were under his control. Under the impact of the power of the divine and demon, the bone-eroding soul shackling chains strangely merged with Nietian. It was no longer a curse in his body, but had become his vassal, his weapon. Break! In the next moment, Nietian unleashed all of his fiend god power. His armor of fiend god went berserk as he reached out with one hand, and 9 bone-eroding soul shackling chains shot out at the same time. Like 9 giant snakes, they swooped down with incomparable ferocity. Rumble! 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 The 9 bone-eroding soul shackling chains were like sharp arrows, whistling through the air, and directly pierced through the black tree hand in the air. Ah! His black tree body was broken, and Yuli howled in pain. He immediately felt the aura of death approaching, and his eyes revealed unconcealable horror. This time, he really had no way to turn the situation around. Pfft! At this time, the 9 bone-eroding soul shackling chains actually merged together, and like a ferocious beast, they pierced through Yuli's black tree body. No! Yuli felt death approaching, and he raised his black tree arm and shouted with difficulty. Unfortunately, it was all too late. Die! A hint of a cold smile appeared at the corner of Nietian's mouth, as he let out a bellow and jerked his arm. With a loud crashing sound, the 10,000-meter-long black tree was ripped in two by the bone-eroding soul shackling chain. Chapter 2446. The blackwood rain in the sky took a long time to dissipate completely. The air was filled with a dark and bloody aura, making people feel suffocated. Nietian stood in the air, his gaze still cold. He won the final battle of life and death. Yuli, Yu clan's old ancestor, Dark Prison Emperor, an expert of his generation, died in his hands. However, Nietian was not calm at all. His aura continued to rise. The terrifying power of the gods and demons was like waves of dark air shooting up to the sky, causing the earth to tremble. Nie Tian killed Yu Li in one move, proving the power of the seal. At this moment, his martial body could not take it any more. Bloody wounds appeared all over his body. His body was riddled with holes, and his flesh was badly mangled. Fat, the seal can't suppress it any longer. Nie Tian sensed that extremely dark power was rising from the depths of the sea of gods and devils. His body couldn't bear such a terrifying power at all. The sea of gods and demons was like a barrier, preventing the seal from completely bursting. But the sea of gods and demons was boiling, the barrier was about to collapse. Once the seal broke through the barrier, it would be the time for Nie Tian to die. What should I do? What should I do? What should I do? What should I do? Fat Cat jumped around, his body was drenched in cold sweat, he was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. He was above the sea of gods and demons, of course he could feel the terrifying power of the seal. If the sealing power was completely unleashed, not only would Nie Tian not survive, but the little fat cat would also die. Boom, boom, boom. In the mythical demon ocean, the power of the mythical demon was surging, and the power of the seal was about to rush out of the sea. The wounds on Nie Tian's body were even more terrifying. He felt that every bone in his body was about to be torn apart. If not for his strong martial body, he would have been a corpse under such circumstances. Nie Tian, hang in there, you must hang in there. Fat Cat muttered. His face was covered in cold sweat. Bang! Just at this time, a majestic force appeared, rushing up from the sea of gods and demons. It was like a flood dragon breaking out of the abyss, rushing out with a bang. Boom! The entire sea of gods and demons shook violently. Endless waves of gods and demons surged in all directions. The entire sea swayed as if it was about to collapse. Pooh! Puff! Nie Tian sensed it. His body shook and he spat out 3 mouthfuls of blood. His face was as pale as paper, and his eyes became dispirited, losing their luster little by little. Nie Tian, pull yourself together. You must stay awake. The fat cat's figure appeared, shouting and yelling. Once again, it released the glazed chi to attack Nie Tian's divine sense, keeping him awake. The sea of gods and demons was the final barrier of the seal. If Nie Tian fell unconscious, it would be completely over. Nie Tian suddenly became clear-headed. He opened his eyes and blood flowed out of his pupils. He felt that all the bones and meridians in his body were broken, and he was about to lose consciousness. Fat, I will hold on. Nie Tian used all the strength in his body to speak with difficulty. His whole body was surging with a pungent dark aura. But this was a powerful seal that was about to go out of control. No matter how strong Nie Tian's willpower was, he could not withstand the impact of the seal. Huh! At this time, the fat cat's eyes suddenly trembled, as if he had thought of something. He suddenly let out a strange cry and said, I know! At the last moment, he finally thought of how to suppress the seal. I will make a sealing gate for this seal. The fat cat let out a strange cry. He was very excited. Seal gate. Nie Tian's divine sense slowly weakened. His body swayed as if he was about to fall. He said in a daze, Nie Tian, this is your last chance. You must hold on. The fat cat said in a deep voice. Once again, he released the azure chi from his body and continuously attacked Nie Tian, trying to keep him awake. Previously, the fat cat had used too much azure chi to transfer the curse shackles. At this time, he did not have much azure chi left. Then, the fat cat took out the 9 extremities from Nie Tian's body and let Chiwu Yunxiu and Jun ouching out. This time, whether Nie Tian could survive this life-or-death situation depended on Chiwu Yunxiu and Jun ouching. Nie Tian. Chiwu Yunxiu came out of the 9 extremities, and could not help but scream when she saw Nie Tian's bloody appearance. Nie Tian, what happened to you? June Ouching was also shocked by the scene in front of her. She had never seen Nie Tian injured so badly. Nie Tian's divine sense was already blurred. He could only vaguely see two familiar faces in front of him. He wanted to say something, but no sound came out. You too, Nie Tian is now in a life-or-death situation. I don't have time to explain too much to you. Whether Nie Tian can survive or not depends on you. The fat cat did not beat around the bush and said directly. QL 11-inch Master Chinchilla, what do you want us to do? Chiwu Yunxiu was after all a person who had been through a lot. She immediately calmed down and said in a deep voice. The fat cat nodded and said, the seal in Nie Tian's body is going out of control. The only way now is to suppress the seal. I want to make a gate of sealing for this powerful seal. Huh! Chiwu Yunxiu was stunned for a moment and said, Master Chinchilla, this seal is very powerful. I'm afraid. I know how powerful the seal is. The fat cat did not have time. It directly interrupted Chiwu Yunxiu and said, I want to use the source of darkness to make the gate of sealing. How could the fat cat not know that Chiwu Yunxiu was worried about not having a suitable material to make the gate of sealing? After all, the seal was too powerful. What kind of power was needed to make the gate of sealing? Source of darkness? Chiwu Yunxiu was stunned when she heard the fat cat's words. She suddenly exclaimed, the dark abyss! Yes. The little fat cat nodded heavily and said, that's exactly what I want Nie Tian to do. I want him to merge the three forms of darkness into a complete version of the dark abyss, and then turn it into a sealing gate. This. Chiwu Yunxiu was stunned when she heard the fat cat's words. Nie Tian was only a mid-stage paramount god. Could his martial body really withstand the complete source of darkness? Moreover, Nie Tian only had the heart of darkness in his body. Where could he find the soul of darkness and the hand of darkness? Of course, Chiwu Yunxiu didn't know that the soul of darkness and the hand of darkness were already in Nie Tian's hands. There's no time to think too much. We have to start now. The fat cat didn't say much. Yes. Chiwu Yunxiu and June Ouching nodded at the same time. No matter what, they had to give it a try. By now, Nie Tian had already fainted. His body was covered in blood, and the wounds all over his body were expanding. It was almost impossible to maintain his body in one piece. The fat cat raised its fat paw and sent Nie Tian's body high up in the sky, where it lay quietly. Then, it released waves of glazed qi, and in the blink of an eye, a grand formation was formed. Blood flowed out of the corner of the fat cat's mouth. It didn't have enough glazed qi, so it had to use blood qi. After the grand spell formation was set up, two very obvious spell formation eyes appeared, and Nie Tian was standing on one of them. The other was prepared for Chiwu Yunxiu. Chiwu Yunxiu's figure moved, directly landing on another formation eye.